You may be the only conscious being, you may be the only conscious being, moving through a world filled with perfect imitations of awareness rather than awareness itself. At first, this idea feels abstract, even playful, but the longer it lingers, the more unsettling it becomes. Every face you've ever looked into, every voice that has responded to you, every expression of love, anger, or understanding could be nothing more than a complex performance. Not intentional deception, but an empty choreography. Bodies behaving exactly as conscious beings should, without anything happening inside. This possibility arises from the fact that consciousness is invisible from the outside. You never observe awareness directly. You infer it. You assume it. When someone smiles, you assume they feel joy. When they cry, you assume they feel pain. But all you truly witness is behavior. The inner experience, the feeling of being someone, is something you only ever access in yourself. Your own consciousness is undeniable because it is immediate. You feel thoughts forming. You feel emotions arise. You feel the weight of existence pressing inward. But with others, there is always a gap. No test, no conversation, no act of intimacy can close it completely. Even the most convincing display of emotion could, in theory, be automatic. What makes this idea emotionally disturbing is not isolation, but uncertainty. If everyone else might be empty, then connection becomes fragile. Love becomes a leap of faith. Empathy becomes an assumption layered over silence. You continue speaking, caring, trusting, not because you know others are conscious, but because you cannot survive treating them as if they aren't. And so you move through life surrounded by minds you can never enter, never verify, never truly know are there at all. Everyone else could be an empty mind. Everyone else could be an empty mind, perfectly convincing on the outside and completely silent on the inside. This idea slips in quietly because it doesn't contradict anything you see. People talk, laugh, argue, create art, fall in love, and suffer in ways that look indistinguishable from genuine inner life. But appearance has never been proof of experience. A machine can replicate behavior. An algorithm can simulate emotion. What you observe in others may be nothing more than output, responses triggered by inputs, not feelings arising from within. The unsettling part is how little evidence you actually have. You never hear another person's thoughts. You never feel their fear, their joy, or their pain directly. You infer those inner states from patterns of speech, facial expressions, and actions. But inference is not certainty. It is a habit your mind relies on to function socially. Your own awareness feels undeniable because it is immediate. Thoughts arrive without permission. Emotions grip you from the inside. Existence feels heavy, vivid, unavoidable. Yet when you look outward, that vividness disappears. You are surrounded by bodies that behave as if they feel, but whose inner worlds could be completely absent. This idea becomes emotionally disturbing when you realize how much of your life depends on assuming others are real inside. Love, guilt, kindness, cruelty, trust, all of it presumes another experiencing subject on the receiving end. If those minds are empty, then every connection you've ever felt rests on an unprovable belief. You continue to care not because you know others are conscious, but because acting otherwise would collapse the meaning of your own experience. Your memories might be fabricated. Carefully arranged impressions that feel real but have no genuine past behind them. This idea is disturbing because memory feels like the most intimate proof of who you are. Your childhood, your relationships, your failures and victories all seem to form a continuous story that grounds you in reality. But when you examine memory closely, it begins to unravel. You never relive the past itself. You only experience a present reconstruction of it, assembled by your mind in real time. Neuroscience shows that memory is not a recording, but a rewrite. Each time you remember something, it changes slightly, shaped by your current emotions, beliefs, and expectations. Over time, accuracy fades while confidence remains. A memory can feel vivid, emotional, and personal while being partially wrong or entirely false. The feeling of certainty does not guarantee truth. What makes this idea emotionally unsettling is how much of your identity depends on memory being reliable. If your memories are fabricated, then the person you believe you've been becoming may never have existed in the way you think. The lessons you learned, the pain you endured, the love you remember receiving could be stories your mind created to give continuity to experience. There is no internal marker that tells you a memory is genuine. A false memory feels the same as a real one. Both carry emotion, both shape behavior, both influence decisions. If your past is unstable, then your sense of self becomes fragile, resting on mental images that could dissolve under scrutiny. You move forward trusting a past you cannot verify, carrying a history that feels real even if it never truly happened. Reality may have begun moments ago. Reality may have begun moments ago, fully formed, seamless, and convincing, with no actual history behind it. This idea is unsettling because it attacks the most basic assumption you carry without thinking, that there was a before. You assume the world existed yesterday, that your past experiences genuinely occurred, that time has been unfolding in a continuous line, but none of that is directly observable. All you ever experience is the present moment, along with memories and evidence that claim to represent a past you cannot access. If reality began just moments ago, everything you see would look exactly the same. Your memories would feel detailed and emotional. History books would be filled with events. Scars on your body would suggest injuries. Photographs would show moments you believe you lived through. None of this would need to be real in order to be convincing. It would only need to be consistent. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how helpless you are against it. There is no test that could disprove it. Any attempt to verify the past would rely on memories, records, or physical traces that could have appeared instantly along with the rest of reality. The feeling of continuity could itself be an illusion, implanted to make the world feel stable and trustworthy. If this were true, then your sense of endurance, growth, and survival becomes fragile. You feel like someone who has been moving through time, learning and changing, but you may instead be someone who has just arrived, carrying a lifetime of borrowed experiences. You continue living as if the past happened, not because you know it did, but because doubting it offers no ground to stand on. Free will could be a post hoc illusion. Free will could be a post hoc illusion, a story your mind tells itself after decisions have already been made. This idea is disturbing because choice feels immediate and personal. You experience yourself weighing options, hesitating, deciding, and acting. It feels as though your conscious will stands at the center, directing everything, but closer examination suggests something darker. Studies in neuroscience show that the brain often initiates actions before you become consciously aware of deciding. By the time you choose, the machinery may already be in motion. Your sense of agency may arrive late, like a narrator explaining events after they've already occurred. The feeling of, "I chose this," could be a mental explanation layered on top of unconscious processes shaped by genetics, past experiences, environment, and biology. You don't witness these forces at work. You only experience their final output as a decision that feels free. What makes this emotionally unsettling is what it does to responsibility and identity. If your choices are formed before you are aware of them, then the person you believe you are, the deliberate chooser, may be more observer than author. Pride and guilt become complicated. Regret becomes ambiguous. You judge yourself and others as if control was absolute, even if it never was. The illusion persists because it is functional. Believing you choose keeps you motivated, engaged, and accountable. Without it, action feels hollow. You continue making decisions, planning futures, and blaming yourself for outcomes, not because you are certain you are free, but because living without that belief threatens the coherence of your entire experience. You never experience reality directly. You never experience reality directly, only a private version of it constructed inside your mind. This idea is unsettling because it means you have never touched the world as it truly is. What you see is not reality, but light translated into electrical signals. What you hear is not sound itself, but vibrations converted into neural patterns. Even your own body is known to you through sensations interpreted by the brain, not through direct access. You live inside a simulation built for survival, not for truth. Your mind acts as a filter, deciding what matters and what can be ignored. It fills in gaps, smooths rough edges, and edits out most of what exists. Colors, shapes, emotions, even time itself are not properties of the external world as you experience them. They are interpretations, useful illusions that help you function. Reality in its raw form may be unimaginably different, alien, or even incompatible with human understanding. What makes this emotionally disturbing is the isolation it implies. No matter how close you feel to the world, you are always separated from it by your own perception. You cannot step outside your senses to check if what you see is accurate. You cannot compare your experience to reality itself. You are trapped inside the only interface you will ever have. Every certainty you hold is mediated. Every belief rests on a translation. You move through life trusting a representation you can never verify, hoping that what feels solid, meaningful, and real is not just a convincing echo of something forever out of reach. Natural laws may fail without warning. Natural laws may fail without warning, not gradually, not dramatically, but instantly and without explanation. This idea is unsettling because it undermines the quiet trust you place in reality every second you are alive. You assume gravity will hold, time will move forward, cause will follow effect, and matter will behave tomorrow as it did a moment ago. You build your entire sense of safety on this assumption, rarely noticing it because it feels absolute. But there is no ultimate guarantee that the universe must remain consistent. The laws of nature are not rules enforced by anything outside reality. They are patterns you have observed so far. You believe the sun will rise because it always has, not because the universe owes you continuity. Logic itself cannot prove that the future must resemble the past. It only feels reasonable because your mind is wired to expect stability. What makes this idea emotionally disturbing is how exposed it leaves you. Every plan, every promise, every expectation relies on invisible regularities holding together. If those regularities fail, there is no warning system, no gradual breakdown. One moment physics behaves as expected, the next moment it doesn't, and there is no reason it had to tell you in advance. You trust the ground beneath your feet without checking whether gravity plans to remain loyal. You trust your body to function according to biology. You trust cause and effect enough to believe your actions matter, but all of this rests on habit, not certainty. You live as if the universe is reliable because doubting it would make action impossible, even though nothing guarantees the rules won't quietly stop applying the very next moment. Meaning might be invented, not discovered. Meaning might be invented, not discovered. Something created by the mind rather than uncovered in the structure of reality. This idea is unsettling because it quietly removes the foundation beneath everything you care about. You grow up believing meaning is out there, waiting to be found, embedded in work, love, morality, progress, or destiny, that if you search long enough or live correctly, life will reveal what it is for. But when you look closely, meaning never appears on its own. It only shows up after a human mind assigns it. The universe itself offers no explanations. Events happen without purpose. Suffering occurs without reason, and outcomes unfold without regard for fairness. Stars explode, species vanish, People live and die, all without instruction manuals or moral subtitles. Meaning enters only when a conscious being looks at this chaos and decides something matters. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how fragile that makes everything you value. If meaning is invented, then it is optional. It depends on perspective, culture, mood, and belief. What feels sacred to you could feel empty to someone else. What gives your life direction could dissolve if the story you tell yourself stops convincing you. This doesn't mean meaning is fake, but it does mean it isn't guaranteed. You are not discovering a hidden truth written into reality. You are actively holding meaning together moment by moment. Purpose becomes something you maintain, not something you find. And the fear beneath this idea is simple and heavy. If you stop inventing meaning, nothing outside of you will replace it. Morality may not exist objectively. Morality may not exist objectively, not written into the fabric of the universe, but assembled quietly inside the human mind. This idea unsettles because morality feels solid. You feel that some things are truly wrong, not just disliked. Cruelty feels different from preference. Injustice feels heavier than inconvenience. But when you look for moral facts outside human belief, they are nowhere to be found. The universe contains particles, forces, and motion, but no visible rules about good or evil. Stars explode without guilt. Nature causes suffering without apology. What we call morality may emerge from biology, culture, and survival rather than truth. Humans evolved to cooperate, to punish betrayal, to protect their own. Over time, these instincts hardened into rules, traditions, and moral systems that feel authoritative because they are emotionally charged. Right and wrong feel real because they are tied to fear, empathy, and belonging, not because they exist independently of us. This becomes emotionally disturbing when you realize how fragile moral certainty might be. If morality is not objective, then moral disagreement is not about truth versus error, but about incompatible frameworks. Two people can hold opposite moral convictions with equal sincerity and neither be wrong in any cosmic sense. Atrocities can be committed by people who feel morally justified from within their own system. You continue to act morally not because the universe demands it, but because you do, because abandoning morality would unravel trust, cooperation, and meaning. You live as if good and evil are real, while knowing they may exist only as shared agreements layered over a silent, indifferent reality that never told you how to behave at all. Right and wrong could be products of power. Right and wrong could be products of power, shaped less by truth or goodness and more by who has the ability to enforce their version of reality. This idea is disturbing because morality feels sacred. You grow up believing that some actions are inherently right and others inherently wrong, independent of opinion or authority. But when you look closely at history, moral certainty often follows strength. What is called good tends to align with the values of those who win, rule, or dominate. What is called evil is frequently assigned to those without the power to define the narrative. Laws change. Moral standards shift. Practices once condemned become accepted, and acts once celebrated become shameful. These transformations rarely occur because truth suddenly reveals itself. More often, they follow political change, economic influence, or cultural dominance. Morality moves when power moves. What makes this idea emotionally unsettling is what it implies about your own beliefs. The values you feel deeply attached to may not feel right because they are right, but because they were taught to you by the systems that shaped you. Education, religion, media, and tradition do not just transmit morals, they stabilize authority. They reward compliance and punish deviation, slowly training conscience to align with structure. If morality is rooted in power, then guilt becomes a social tool, not a moral signal. Shame becomes a mechanism of control. Even outrage can be engineered, directed, and withdrawn depending on who benefits from it. You continue believing in right and wrong because life without moral structure feels unbearable, even as you realize that what feels morally obvious to you might have felt immoral in another time, place, or hierarchy of power. Death may be total annihilation. Death may be total annihilation, not a transition, not a passage, not a door, but a complete and final erasure. This idea unsettles because it removes every comforting buffer between life and nothingness. No observer remains, no experience follows, no darkness is felt because even darkness requires awareness. Consciousness does not drift or fade into another form. It simply stops. The moment after death is not emptiness. There is no moment at all. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how incompatible it feels with being alive. Right now, experience feels continuous and unavoidable. Thoughts keep appearing, sensations keep happening. It feels impossible to imagine not experiencing anything, yet that may be exactly what death is. Not peace, not rest, just the absence of all perspective. Every fear, hope, regret, and desire depends on continuation. Annihilation strips them of their future relevance. The pain you endure, the love you build, the meaning you attach to your life, all of it exists only as long as consciousness does. When awareness ends, there is no subject left to receive closure or validation. This idea becomes heavier when you realize there is no way to rehearse it, no gradual understanding. You cannot experience non-existence while alive, and once it happens, there is no one left to realize it happened. Death does not arrive as an event you witness. It arrives as the end of witnessing itself. You continue living, forming attachments and plans, knowing that everything you experience may vanish without remainder, leaving no echo behind to confirm you were ever here. The self might not persist through time. The self might not persist through time, even though it feels like the most stable thing you have. You experience yourself as a continuous I, moving from past to present to future, carrying memories, intentions, and identity forward. It feels obvious that the person you were years ago is the same person reading this now. But when you look closely, that continuity begins to fracture. Your body replaces its cells. Your beliefs shift. Your values change. Your fears, desires, and priorities evolve. What remains constant is harder to identify than it seems. Memory creates the illusion of persistence. You remember being younger, and that memory gives the impression that the same self has endured. But memory is not identity. It is a record and an unreliable one. If memory were altered or lost, the sense of being the same person would weaken or disappear. This suggests that the self may not be a single enduring entity, but a sequence of related mental states loosely connected by narrative. What makes this emotionally unsettling is what it does to responsibility, love, and survival. If the self does not persist, then who exactly suffers consequences later? Who benefits from sacrifices made now? When you promise something to your future self, you may be promising it to someone who will not truly be you, but a successor who only feels connected. You cling to the idea of a lasting self because it makes life intelligible. It allows growth, regret, and hope to make sense. Without it, existence becomes a series of moments inheriting a past they did not live through, carrying forward identities they did not choose. You continue to act as if you will still be you tomorrow, not because it is proven, but because doubting it destabilizes everything you do. You could already be dying stretched into awareness. You could already be dying with your final moments stretched into what feels like an entire lifetime of awareness. This idea is disturbing because it reframes everything you experience as something that may already be ending. In extreme situations, trauma, shock, or near death, the brain can distort time dramatically. Seconds can feel like hours. A single moment can expand, filled with vivid thoughts, memories, and imagined futures. If consciousness can stretch time internally, then what you call now might not be unfolding in real time at all. Your mind could be replaying, reconstructing, or generating experience as the body shuts down. The continuity of days, years, and plans might be a narrative assembled in the final instant, a desperate attempt to make sense of existence before it disappears. Every memory you recall, every sensation you feel, could be part of a last internal cascade rather than an ongoing life. What makes this emotionally unsettling is how impossible it would be to notice. Awareness would feel normal, the world would seem stable, time would appear to pass as it always has. There would be no internal alarm announcing the end. Consciousness does not come with a timestamp. It only knows experience, not duration. If this were true, then the future you imagine may never arrive. Conversations you think you will have, choices you believe are ahead of you, and fears you postpone might already be unreachable. You would be living inside a final echo, mistaking intensity for longevity, and yet, from the inside, nothing changes. You still feel present, you still care, you still think there is time, which means that even if this is the end, it feels exactly like life, unfolding one convincing moment at a time. Identity may be a story, not a fact. Identity may be a story, not a fact, something continuously told rather than something solidly possessed. This idea is unsettling because your sense of self feels stable and intimate. You believe there is a core you that persists through time, the same one who remembers the past, makes choices, and imagines the future. But when you look closely, that core begins to blur. Thoughts appear without warning. Emotions shift on their own. Beliefs change quietly, sometimes without your consent. The feeling of continuity remains, even as the contents constantly change. What you call identity may simply be a narrative your mind constructs to stitch these changes together. Memory provides a timeline, language supplies a structure, and emotion gives it weight. The story feels personal because it is told from the inside, but that does not make it objectively real. It only makes it convincing. This becomes emotionally disturbing when you realize how flexible that story is. Trauma can rewrite it, time can erode it. New experiences can contradict earlier chapters without destroying the sense of self. You feel like the same person, not because you are unchanged, but because the story keeps updating itself to preserve coherence. If identity is a narrative, then there may be no fixed self behind it, just a process interpreting itself moment by moment, selecting what to remember, what to forget, and what to emphasize in order to feel continuous. You live as if you are someone definite because the alternative feels like disappearance, even though the you protect may exist only as long as the story keeps being told. The universe is indifferent to suffering. The universe is indifferent to suffering, unmoved by pain, untouched by loss, and silent in the face of every scream that has ever existed. This idea unsettles because suffering feels like it should matter on a cosmic level. Pain feels urgent, demanding recognition, as if reality itself ought to respond. When someone suffers, it feels wrong for that suffering to vanish into nothing, unnoticed by anything larger than human awareness. Yet the universe offers no reaction. Stars continue burning, galaxies collide, time moves forward without hesitation. There is nothing in the structure of reality that rewards goodness or punishes cruelty. Earthquakes do not choose their victims. Disease does not discriminate. Tragedy does not pause to ask whether it is deserved. Suffering happens not because it must mean something, but because conditions allow it to occur. The universe does not oppose it, and it does not support it. It simply allows it. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how alone it leaves human values. Compassion, justice, and mercy feel deeply real to you, yet they do not exist outside minds that care. The universe does not grieve with you. It does not acknowledge effort, sacrifice, or endurance. It offers no confirmation that pain has purpose. If suffering has meaning, it is not given from above. It exists only where conscious beings insist it does. This places an unbearable weight on human responsibility. Nothing else will care unless people do. Nothing else will intervene. Meaning does not descend from the universe. It is carried fragile and temporary inside those who are capable of feeling at all. Pleasure and pain may be equally meaningless. Pleasure and pain may be equally meaningless, despite feeling like the most important forces in your life. From the inside, pleasure feels like something to pursue, and pain feels like something to avoid at all costs. Your instincts, goals, and moral judgments are built around this contrast, but when you step back, that distinction begins to lose its authority. Pleasure and pain are both internal signals, patterns of neural activity that arise and fade without carrying inherent significance beyond how they feel to you in the moment. The universe does not register either one. Joy leaves no deeper imprint than suffering. A moment of ecstasy and a moment of agony are equally silent on a cosmic scale. They do not alter the structure of reality or accumulate meaning over time. They occur, they are felt, and then they vanish, leaving no trace outside your subjective experience. What makes this idea emotionally unsettling is how much of your life depends on believing that pleasure and pain matter in some ultimate sense. You endure hardship for future happiness. You justify actions based on reducing suffering. If both are equally meaningless, then the motivation behind striving, sacrificing, and caring begins to feel fragile. Even worse, pleasure and pain may not even matter to the self enduring them. Each sensation exists only in the present. The pleasure you felt yesterday is gone. The pain you feared tomorrow does not yet exist. You live chasing states that cannot be stored or preserved. You continue to treat pleasure as valuable and pain as tragic, not because they carry objective meaning, but because abandoning that distinction would make experience itself feel intolerably empty. The future might already be fixed. The future might already be fixed, laid out in advance long before you ever feel yourself choosing. This idea unsettles because it turns every decision into something that only feels open. You experience choice as possibility, as a branching path where multiple outcomes could occur. But if the universe follows strict laws of cause and effect, then every thought you have, every impulse you feel, and every action you take may be the inevitable result of prior conditions stretching back before you were born. From this perspective, the future is not being created moment by moment. It is being revealed. Your sense of deliberation may be nothing more than your mind watching itself arrive at conclusions that were already determined by biology, environment, and past events. You feel like an author, but you may be a reader discovering a story already written. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how it reframes responsibility and hope. Regret becomes strange if you could not have acted otherwise. Pride feels hollow if success was unavoidable. Fear loses its urgency if what will happen cannot be prevented. Even resistance itself may be just another predetermined step. You would still feel effort. You would still struggle, plan, and hesitate. Determinism does not remove the feeling of choice, only its freedom. From the inside, everything appears open. From the outside, it may be locked into place. You continue making decisions because consciousness cannot see ahead. You act as if the future is flexible because awareness unfolds one moment at a time. But beneath that unfolding may lie a single, unalterable path, quietly carrying you forward, whether you believe in it or not. The past could change, unnoticed. The past could change unnoticed, silently rewriting itself while leaving you with no awareness that anything was ever different. This idea is disturbing because it undermines the one place you believe is fixed, The future feels uncertain, the present feels fleeting, but the past feels settled. You rely on it to anchor your identity, your decisions, and your sense of cause and effect. But your access to the past is indirect. You never experience it again. You only experience memories, records, and traces that claim to represent it. If the past were to change, you would have no reliable way to detect it. Your memories would update along with it. Documents would reflect the new version. Physical evidence would align seamlessly. The feeling of continuity would remain intact because your mind would have no reference point for comparison. From the inside, the revised past would feel exactly like the original one. What makes this emotionally unsettling is the loss of certainty it introduces. If the past is not fixed, then neither is responsibility, growth, or learning. The lessons you believe you earned through experience could have been shaped by events that never truly happened in the way you remember them. Even regret becomes unstable if the events that produced it are not guaranteed to be permanent. You live with the sense that history is behind you, safely locked away, even though your trust in it depends entirely on systems that could adjust without leaving a trace. You move forward assuming your past is real not because it cannot change, but because you would never know if it already had. Reason cannot justify itself. Reason cannot justify itself because the very act of justifying already assumes reason is valid. This idea is unsettling because reason feels like the ultimate authority. You rely on it to decide what is true, what is false, what makes sense, and what does not. When something feels unreasonable, you dismiss it instinctively. When an argument feels logical, you trust it. Reason feels like the ground beneath thought itself, but when you look closely, that ground begins to disappear. Any attempt to defend reason must use reason to do so. If you ask why logic works, the only answers available are logical ones. If you try to prove that reasoning leads to truth, you must reason your way there. The structure closes in on itself. There is no external vantage point from which reason can be evaluated without already relying on it. Justification turns circular, not because of carelessness, but because there is nowhere else to stand. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how exposed it leaves you. You want certainty. You want to believe that your thinking rests on something solid and unquestionable. Instead, you discover that your most trusted tool has no deeper defense. It works because you use it. You trust it because abandoning it would leave you unable to think at all. Reason becomes less like a foundation and more like a necessity you cannot step outside of. You continue to rely on it not because it has proven itself, but because rejecting it would dissolve meaning, coherence, and communication in an instant. You think, decide, argue, and understand using a system that cannot ultimately explain why it deserves your trust, only that without it, nothing else remains. Language may distort truth. Language may distort truth, even as it convinces you that it reveals it. Words feel like tools for clarity. You rely on them to explain, understand, argue, and connect. They give the impression that reality can be captured, packaged, and shared. But language does not mirror the world. It filters it. The moment an experience is translated into words, it is simplified, categorized, and reshaped to fit structures that were never designed to hold raw reality. You never describe what something truly is. You describe what it resembles, what it's useful for, or how it makes you feel. A word replaces complexity with a symbol, and that symbol slowly becomes mistaken for the thing itself. Over time, you stop noticing what falls outside the label. You think you understand because you can name. What makes this emotionally unsettling is how deeply thought depends on language. You don't just speak with words, you think with them. If language is flawed, then your thinking inherits those flaws. Entire beliefs, identities, and moral systems may rest on linguistic shortcuts rather than truth. Two people can use the same word and mean entirely different things, yet assume agreement because the sound matches. Language also shapes what can be thought at all. If there is no word for an experience, it becomes harder to notice, harder to remember, harder to share. Entire aspects of reality may remain invisible simply because language never evolved to capture them. You trust words because you have no alternative. Even doubting language requires using it. So you move through reality guided by symbols that feel precise while quietly bending what they claim to describe, shaping a world that makes sense in speech but not necessarily in truth. You can never confirm another mind. You can never confirm another mind, no matter how close, how intimate, or how long you have known someone. This idea is unsettling because other people feel undeniably real. They speak, react, suffer, and express inner lives that seem obvious. But none of that is direct evidence of consciousness. You never experience another person's thoughts from the inside. You never feel their fear or joy as they feel it. You only observe behavior and interpret it through your own mind. Every assumption of another mind is an inference. When someone says they are in pain, you believe them because you know what pain feels like in yourself. You project your inner experience outward and assume something similar exists in them. But projection is not proof. A perfectly programmed system could behave the same way without experiencing anything at all. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how much of your life depends on this uncertainty. Love, guilt, kindness, and cruelty all presuppose someone on the other side who actually feels. If you are wrong, then your deepest connections rest on faith rather than knowledge. Even the most meaningful conversation could be happening across a silent gap. There is no experiment that can solve this. Any test relies on responses, and responses can be simulated. Consciousness leaves no visible signature. It announces itself only from the inside. You continue to trust that others are real, not because you can prove it, but because doubting it would isolate you completely. You live surrounded by minds you must assume are there, knowing that assumption can never become certainty, no matter how close you get. Beliefs may serve survival, not truth. Beliefs may serve survival, not truth, existing to keep you functioning rather than to keep you informed. This idea is unsettling because you trust your mind to be a tool for understanding reality. You assume your beliefs, especially the ones that feel most intuitive and deeply held, reflect how the world actually is. But evolution does not reward accuracy, it rewards usefulness. A belief only needs to help you survive, cooperate, or avoid danger, not reveal objective truth. If a false belief keeps you alive more effectively than a true one, the false belief wins. Over time, minds shaped by survival pressures become optimized for action, not insight. Fear exaggerates threats. Hope inflates outcomes. Meaning reduces complexity into manageable stories. These distortions feel natural because they are functional. What makes this emotionally disturbing is the realization that your confidence means very little. A belief can feel obvious, necessary, and deeply personal while being systematically wrong. The feeling of certainty may be nothing more than a biological signal encouraging commitment, not a sign of correctness. Your moral beliefs may exist to stabilize groups. Your spiritual beliefs may soothe death anxiety. Your sense of purpose may prevent paralysis. None of these need to be true to be effective. They only need to motivate behavior. You continue believing because disbelief can be costly. Doubt slows action. Radical honesty can isolate. The mind may protect itself by favoring beliefs that feel right, even if they quietly pull you away from what is real. Consciousness could be a useless byproduct. Consciousness could be a useless byproduct, an accidental side effect of complex processes that would function just as well without it. This idea is disturbing because consciousness feels central to everything. Your thoughts, emotions, suffering, joy, and sense of being alive all seem like the point of existence. Yet it is possible that none of it actually does anything. Your brain may make decisions, solve problems, and guide behavior entirely through unconscious mechanisms, with awareness merely tagging along afterward, watching but not steering. From this view, consciousness does not cause actions. It reports them. Decisions are made before you become aware of choosing. Emotions are triggered before you notice feeling them. Even the sense of control may be a narrative generated after the fact, giving you the impression of authorship where none exists. Consciousness becomes commentary, not command. What makes this emotionally unsettling is the loss of importance it implies. If awareness is unnecessary, then your inner life, the part that feels most real to you, may be irrelevant to how the world actually operates. The universe does not need your experience. It does not consult your feelings. It does not pause for your awareness to catch up. This idea turns suffering into something especially cruel. If consciousness adds nothing functionally, then pain is not even a useful signal. It is excess, an unnecessary layer of experience laid over processes that would continue regardless. Joy becomes equally fragile, a pleasant echo with no causal power. You continue to feel deeply, think intensely, and experience existence vividly, even as the possibility lingers that none of it matters to how anything unfolds, and that awareness itself may be the most elaborate accident of all. The self dissolves under scrutiny. The self dissolves under scrutiny, even though it feels solid and central to everything you experience. At first glance, the self seems obvious. There is a clear sense of me behind your thoughts, emotions, and actions. It feels like a stable core that remains the same while everything else changes. But when you look closely for that core, it begins to disappear. You can observe thoughts, but not a thinker separate from them. You can notice emotions arise, but not an owner standing behind them. Each attempt to locate the self reveals only more mental activity. What feels like a single, unified identity may actually be a collection of processes, sensations, memories, impulses, and narratives loosely coordinated in time. The self is not found as an object in experience, only as a concept used to organize experience. When attention turns inward, the I you expect to encounter keeps retreating, replaced by fleeting impressions that never settle into something permanent. This becomes emotionally unsettling because so much of life assumes a stable self. Responsibility, pride, shame, ambition, and fear all rely on the idea that there is someone there to own them. If the self dissolves under examination, then the foundation of personal identity begins to feel hollow. Even suffering changes meaning. Pain is still felt, but by whom? If there is no solid self, then distress arises without a clear owner, appearing and vanishing like everything else. You continue to live as if there is a central you, not because you can find it, but because abandoning that assumption makes ordinary experience feel strangely ungrounded, as if life is happening without anyone truly there. Infinity may guarantee endless horror. Infinity may guarantee endless horror, not as a possibility, but as a mathematical inevitability. This idea is disturbing because infinity feels abstract and distant, yet its implications are brutally intimate. In an infinite universe or an infinite span of time, rarity stops meaning safety. No matter how unlikely a suffering is, infinity ensures it happens, not once, but endlessly. Every catastrophe, every cruelty, every form of pain that can exist will exist somewhere, repeatedly, without final resolution. What makes this emotionally unsettling is that infinity removes the comfort of eventually. In a finite world, suffering can end. In an infinite one, it never truly does. Even if joy outweighs pain overall, the existence of endless suffering cannot be canceled out. There is no balance sheet that makes infinity merciful. There is always more. This also reframes hope. Progress loses its power if every improvement is mirrored by an infinite number of failures elsewhere. Moral victories feel smaller when every horror has infinite counterparts. The idea that things are getting better collapses when there is no final state, no permanent escape, no last tragedy after which suffering stops. You begin to realize that infinity is not neutral. It is indifferent. It does not select for meaning, fairness, or relief. It simply allows everything that can happen to happen forever. From inside a single life, you feel contained. From the perspective of infinity, suffering is not an exception, but a permanent feature. And knowing that there is no ultimate end to pain changes the emotional weight of existence itself, making every moment feel like a fragile island in an ocean with no shore. Countless versions of you may exist. Countless versions of you may exist, living out lives that feel just as real and personal as this one. This idea is unsettling because it fractures the uniqueness you attach to your existence. You experience your life as singular, fragile, and irreplaceable. Every decision feels heavy because it feels final. But if reality allows for multiple outcomes to exist simultaneously, then every choice you didn't make may still be unfolding somewhere else, carried by another version of you who feels just as real as you do now. These versions would not feel like copies. Each one would wake up believing they are the original, carrying memories, emotions, and a sense of continuity that feels complete. From the inside, each life would feel central. From the outside, none would be privileged. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how it dilutes meaning. If every possible path is taken, then failure is never final and success is never exclusive. Every regret is realized somewhere. Every fear is confirmed. Every hope is fulfilled and crushed in equal measure across countless timelines. Your sense of responsibility becomes unstable in this framework. You act as if your decisions close doors forever, yet those doors may only close for this particular version of you. Elsewhere, they remain open, already being walked through. You continue to treat your life as singular because it feels that way from the inside. Even though there may be no cosmic reason, this version of you matters more than the others that may already exist alongside it. Moral responsibility may be impossible. Moral responsibility may be impossible because the conditions required for it may never truly exist. This idea unsettles because responsibility feels obvious. You feel like you choose your actions. You feel accountable for what you do. Praise and blame seem natural, even necessary, for holding society together. Yet, when you look closely at how actions come to be, that sense of authorship begins to fracture. Every decision emerges from genetics you did not choose, a childhood you did not design, and circumstances you did not control. If your actions are determined by prior causes, then you could not have acted otherwise. If they are random, then they are not truly yours either. Determinism removes freedom. Randomness removes control. Between them, there appears to be no space left for the kind of agency moral responsibility requires. You act, but you do not originate yourself. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how much of life depends on blame and credit. Guilt, pride, resentment, forgiveness, punishment, and reward all assume that people deserve what follows from their actions. If moral responsibility is impossible, then much of what structures human judgment becomes questionable. The line between villain and victim blurs. This idea does not erase harm or excuse behavior, but it changes how it is understood. Actions still have consequences. Suffering still matters. But the notion that someone could have truly done otherwise may be an illusion imposed after the fact. You continue holding yourself and others responsible, not because responsibility is philosophically secure, but because letting go of it would unravel the emotional and social fabric that makes life intelligible at all. Justice might have no foundation. Justice might have no foundation, even though it feels like something solid that holds society together. You grow up believing that fairness is real, that wrong actions deserve punishment and good actions deserve reward. Courts, laws, and moral codes give justice an air of objectivity, as if it exists independently of human opinion. But when you look closely, justice begins to look less like a fact of reality and more like a fragile agreement. Different cultures define justice in radically different ways. What is considered fair in one time or place is condemned in another. Punishments shift, rights expand or disappear, and moral priorities reverse themselves across history. This suggests that justice is not discovered but constructed, shaped by power, fear, tradition, and circumstance rather than grounded in something universal. What makes this idea emotionally unsettling is how much suffering is justified in the name of justice. People are imprisoned, shamed, excluded, and executed because systems declare it deserved. If justice has no objective foundation, then these outcomes are not expressions of moral truth, but consequences of collective belief enforced through authority. Even personal feelings of fairness become suspect. You feel outraged when treated unjustly, yet that feeling may be nothing more than an evolved emotional response designed to promote cooperation, not truth. The universe itself does not recognize fairness. It does not correct imbalances or punish wrongdoing. Events unfold without moral accounting. You continue to believe in justice because without it, harm feels unbearable and order feels impossible. But beneath laws and ideals may be nothing more than human agreement, holding back chaos, vulnerable to collapse the moment belief weakens. Suffering may be unavoidable in any world. Suffering may be unavoidable in any world, not as a flaw of this reality, but as a consequence of existence itself. This idea is disturbing because it suggests there is no version of reality where pain is fully removed. You can imagine better worlds, fairer, kinder, more advanced, but every world that allows awareness also allows the capacity to be harmed. To feel pleasure, to care, to desire, is to become vulnerable. The very systems that make experience meaningful also make suffering possible. Any world with consciousness contains limits. Bodies can fail, minds can break, expectations can be violated. Even in a perfectly just society, loss would still exist. Change alone guarantees it. What you love can disappear. What you depend on can collapse. A world without suffering would require a world without attachment, without contrast, without stakes, and that may not qualify as a world worth experiencing at all. What makes this emotionally unsettling is the sense of inevitability. Suffering is not just the result of mistakes, cruelty, or poor design. It may be structurally built into being something rather than nothing. Even attempts to eliminate pain often create new forms of it. Comfort dulls, boredom emerges, safety narrows freedom, control introduces fragility. This idea quietly undermines the hope that progress will one day fix everything. Technology can reduce suffering, but not erase it. Ethics can manage it, but not eliminate it. There is no final solution that closes the loop. You continue to search for meaning not because suffering can be removed, but because meaning is what makes suffering bearable. You love knowing it can hurt. You care knowing it can break you. You move forward not because a painless world awaits, but because this one, with all its unavoidable weight, is the only place where anything can matter at all. Hope could be psychological anesthesia. Hope could be psychological anesthesia, not a guiding light, but a numbing agent that dulls the pain of reality. This idea is unsettling because hope is usually treated as a virtue. You are taught to cling to it in hardship, to see it as strength, resilience, and wisdom. But anesthesia does not heal wounds. It only makes them bearable. Hope may function the same way, softening the impact of suffering without changing its underlying cause. When situations feel unbearable, hope steps in to quiet the mind. It promises that things will improve, that pain will be temporary, that meaning will emerge later. These promises reduce panic and restore function, allowing you to continue moving forward. But they do not require truth. They only require emotional effectiveness. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how deeply dependence can form. Hope can delay confrontation with reality. It can keep people waiting in harmful situations, enduring suffering that might otherwise provoke change or escape. By making pain tolerable, hope can quietly extend it. This does not mean hope is malicious. It may be an evolved psychological response designed to prevent collapse under stress. A mind without hope might freeze, give up, or self-destruct. Anesthetizing the pain keeps the system operational. You continue to hope not because it guarantees a better future, but because the present becomes unbearable without it. Hope may not point toward truth or resolution, but it keeps consciousness from fully feeling the weight of what already is. Love may be chemistry, misread as meaning. Love may be chemistry misread as meaning, a powerful biological reaction that feels transcendent only because it is deeply convincing. This idea unsettles because love feels like one of the most profound truths of human life. It feels chosen, personal, and irreplaceable. When you love someone, it feels as though you are recognizing something real and rare in them, something that matters beyond explanation. Yet beneath that feeling may be nothing more than neurochemistry doing its work with extraordinary efficiency. Hormones like dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin flood the brain, shaping attachment, desire, and bonding. These chemicals evolve to promote reproduction, cooperation, and survival. They create obsession, longing, and emotional dependence, not because someone is meaningful, but because your biology is designed to make them feel that way. The intensity feels intentional, but the mechanism is indifferent. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how easily meaning dissolves under this view. If love is chemistry, then its depth does not come from truth, but from dosage. The person you believe is unique could be interchangeable with someone else who triggers the same reactions. The connection that feels destined may simply be statistically likely. This idea becomes heavier when you realize how fragile love suddenly seems. Change the brain, and love fades. Alter chemistry, and devotion weakens. The feelings you trusted most may never have pointed outward at another person, but inward at a process trying to preserve itself. You continue to love anyway, not because you know it is more than chemistry, but because the experience feels too powerful to dismiss, even if its meaning may have been borrowed from biology rather than discovered in another soul. Happiness might require ignorance. Happiness might require ignorance, not because truth is cruel by nature, but because seeing too clearly can make joy difficult to sustain. This idea unsettles because it contradicts what you are taught to value. You are told that understanding leads to freedom, that knowledge empowers, that clarity brings peace. Yet again and again, awareness seems to carry a cost. The more you notice patterns of injustice, randomness, suffering, and limitation, the harder it becomes to feel light. Joy starts to feel fragile, temporary, almost inappropriate. Ignorance shelters the mind. When you don't see the full scale of suffering, you can focus on your small circle without guilt. When you don't question the permanence of meaning, achievements feel solid. When you don't examine how much of life is shaped by luck and biology, success feels earned and failure feels fixable. Ignorance doesn't remove pain, but it narrows the field of what you must emotionally carry. What makes this idea emotionally disturbing is the implication that happiness and honesty may be in tension. If deeper understanding consistently erodes comfort, then the pursuit of truth begins to feel like self-sabotage. You start to notice that some of the happiest people are not the most informed, the most reflective, or the most self-aware, but those protected by simplified narratives. Even your own happiest moments often occur when attention is narrowed, when you are absorbed, distracted, or unquestioning. Reflection tends to arrive later, pulling you out of the moment, reframing it, weakening it. You continue to seek understanding because you value truth, but you guard certain illusions because without them, happiness may thin out, becoming something you can explain clearly, but struggle to feel fully. You cannot escape your perspective. You cannot escape your perspective no matter how hard you try to be objective, rational, or open-minded. This idea is unsettling because it means you are permanently trapped inside the way reality appears to you. Every thought you think, every belief you hold, every doubt you question is filtered through the same lens, the one shaped by your biology, your past, your culture, and your limits. Even when you imagine another point of view, you are still imagining it from inside your own mind. You never see the world as it is. You see it as you are. Your values shape what feels important. Your fears shape what feels threatening. Your experiences quietly decide what seems normal, possible, or absurd. Even your attempts at neutrality are guided by assumptions you did not choose and cannot fully see. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how convincing perspective feels. Your view of reality doesn't announce itself as partial. It feels complete. It feels obvious. When you disagree with someone, it rarely feels like a clash of perspectives. It feels like they are missing something clear. Yet, from their side, you may be the one trapped, blind to what seems self-evident to them. There is no mental escape hatch. You cannot step outside your awareness to compare it with another. You cannot temporarily suspend being you. Every insight you gain still arrives shaped by the same internal framework that produced your blind spots in the first place. You move through life believing you are seeing clearly while knowing at some level that clarity itself is relative. Understanding others requires humility, not certainty. And understanding yourself means accepting that even your deepest convictions may be artifacts of a perspective you will never outgrow, only become dimly aware of as it quietly follows you everywhere. Time may not truly flow. Time may not truly flow, even though it feels like it is constantly carrying you forward. This idea is unsettling because the sensation of time passing feels undeniable. Moments seem to arrive, linger briefly, and then vanish into memory. You experience yourself moving from past to future, aging, changing, progressing. But this feeling of flow may not reflect how reality actually works. It may be something your mind generates to make sense of change. Physics does not require time to move. In many descriptions of the universe, all moments exist equally, laid out like frames in a film. Nothing advances. Nothing arrives. The sense of motion comes from how consciousness experiences one moment at a time, not from time itself shifting forward. What makes this emotionally disturbing is what it implies about your life. If time does not flow, then the past is not gone and the future is not waiting. Every moment of pain, joy, fear, and love may exist permanently, fixed in the structure of reality. You are not leaving suffering behind. You are only no longer aware of it. Your feeling of becoming someone new may be an illusion created by memory linking static moments together. Growth, healing, and moving on may describe changes in perspective rather than changes in reality. You continue living as if time carries you forward because that experience feels real and unavoidable, even though the universe itself may be completely still, with every moment of your life already existing all at once. The present might not exist. The present might not exist, not as a distinct moment you can point to, but as a fleeting illusion created by how your mind processes time. This idea unsettles because life feels like it is always happening now. You feel rooted in a current moment, a thin line separating the past from the future. Yet when you try to isolate that moment, it slips away. Any attempt to define the present turns it into something either already gone or not yet arrived. The instant you name it, it has vanished into memory. Physics deepens this discomfort. At a fundamental level, Time does not clearly divide into past, present, and future. Events exist in relation to one another, not in a universal now. What feels simultaneous to you may not be simultaneous elsewhere. The present becomes a local construction, not an objective feature of reality. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how much meaning you attach to the present. You are told to live in it, to be mindful of it, to cherish it. Yet, if the present has no stable existence, then you are always slightly too late or too early, never fully arriving where you believe you are. Your experience of now may be a smoothing function, a mental shortcut that stitches memories and expectations together into something that feels continuous. Consciousness creates a sense of flow to keep you oriented, not because time actually flows. You move through life anchored to a moment that may not exist outside perception, trusting a sense of immediacy that dissolves the moment you try to grasp it, leaving you suspended between what has already disappeared and what has not yet occurred. Reflection may destroy meaning. Reflection may destroy meaning, even though it feels like the path toward understanding it. At first, reflection seems harmless, even noble. You look inward, analyze your beliefs, question your motives, and examine the structures that give your life direction. Meaning feels stronger when you understand it, as if clarity could reinforce purpose, but over time, reflection begins to strip things down. What once felt natural starts to feel constructed. What once felt necessary starts to feel optional. What once felt sacred starts to look contingent. Meaning thrives on immediacy. It lives in action, attachment, commitment, and unexamined participation. Reflection interrupts that flow. It introduces distance between you and what you care about. You stop simply valuing something and begin asking why you value it. And once you ask why, you invite answers that can hollow it out. Tradition becomes habit. Purpose becomes preference. Identity becomes narrative. What makes this emotionally unsettling is how subtle the erosion is. Meaning doesn't collapse all at once. It thins. It loses weight. You still do the same things, but they feel lighter, less anchored. Goals feel arbitrary. Values feel chosen rather than discovered. You begin to sense that many of the reasons you once lived by were never necessary, only convenient. Reflection also turns meaning into something fragile. If it must survive constant analysis to be valid, it becomes exhausting to hold. You start to notice that the moments that feel most meaningful are often the least reflective, when you are absorbed rather than evaluating, committed rather than questioning. You continue reflecting because not thinking feels dishonest. Yet, with every layer you peel back, meaning becomes something you understand more clearly and feel less deeply, until clarity itself begins to feel like the thing that took it away. Values may collapse under reason. Values may collapse under reason, not because they are foolish, but because they were never built to survive relentless questioning. This idea is unsettling because values feel like anchors. They give direction, justify sacrifice, and make suffering tolerable. You assume that if something matters deeply enough, it should be defensible. But when you subject values to continuous rational analysis, cracks begin to appear. You ask why something is good, then why that reason matters, and then why that foundation should be accepted at all. Eventually, the chain ends, not in certainty, but in preference, instinct, or silence. Reason excels at explaining how things work, but it struggles to explain why anything should matter. It can tell you how a value emerged, how it benefits a group, or how it evolved, but those explanations drain it of authority. What once felt sacred becomes contingent. What once felt necessary begins to look optional. The more clearly you understand a value's origin, the harder it becomes to treat it as absolute. What makes this emotionally disturbing is the loss that follows clarity. When values weaken, motivation thins. Sacrifice feels harder to justify. Moral outrage loses its sharp edge. You may still care, But you know now that caring rests on assumptions reason itself cannot secure. You do not abandon values easily. You continue living by them because life without them feels empty and directionless. But something changes. Belief becomes quieter, more fragile. You act as if things matter while knowing you cannot fully explain why they should. Reason keeps asking questions that values cannot answer, and you keep moving forward, balancing between understanding too much and needing to care anyway. Character may be mostly luck. Character may be mostly luck, shaped less by inner strength and more by circumstances you never chose. This idea is unsettling because you are taught to see character as something earned. You believe kindness, discipline, courage, and integrity come from personal effort and moral resolve. But when you look closely, those traits often trace back to factors outside your control. Genetics, upbringing, culture, trauma, opportunity, and timing quietly sculpt behavior long before choice enters the picture. Two people placed in different environments can develop radically different characters while believing they freely became who they are. The calm person may never have faced sustained threat. The generous person may have grown up with abundance. The disciplined person may have been rewarded early for self-control. What feels like virtue may be the byproduct of favorable conditions. What makes this emotionally disturbing is what it does to judgment. Praise and blame begin to lose their footing. If character is largely luck, then moral superiority becomes fragile. Condemnation becomes easier to question. Even self-pride starts to feel unstable, resting on advantages you did not earn. This idea also turns inward. The traits you admire in yourself may not reflect deep moral achievement, but fortunate alignment between your biology and your environment. Under different circumstances, you might have become someone unrecognizable. You continue believing in character as something chosen, because society depends on that belief to assign responsibility and meaning, even as it quietly ignores how uneven the starting conditions truly are. Authenticity may be impossible. Authenticity may be impossible because the self you are trying to be true to may not exist independently of influence. This idea unsettles because you are taught that somewhere beneath expectations, roles, and pressure, there is a real version of you waiting to be expressed. You are told to find it, to live honestly, to be yourself. Yet when you look closely, that self begins to blur. Your preferences, values, and personality traits are shaped long before you are aware of choosing them. From the moment you are born, you absorb language, norms, desires, and fears from your environment. You learn what is rewarded and what is punished. Over time, these influences feel internal, natural, and personal, but they did not originate inside you. Even rebellion is shaped by what it resists. Every attempt at self-expression borrows material from the world that formed you. What makes this emotionally disturbing is the sense of inescapability. If every thought you have is filtered through culture, biology, and past experience, then there may be no untouched core to access. The self becomes a construction responding to context, not a stable essence making independent choices. Authenticity then turns into performance, not deception, but adaptation. You adjust depending on who is watching, what is expected, and what feels safe. Even when you are alone, the audience remains internalized. You judge yourself using standards you did not create. You continue searching for a true self, even as the possibility lingers that what you call you is an ongoing negotiation rather than a discoverable truth, endlessly shaped and reshaped by forces you can never fully step outside of. Progress might be a survival myth. Progress might be a survival myth, a story humans tell themselves to endure uncertainty rather than a fact about reality. The idea feels threatening because progress gives time a direction. It reassures you that suffering is temporary, that mistakes accumulate into wisdom, that tomorrow will be better because yesterday existed. Without this belief, history stops looking like a climb and starts looking like a cycle, or worse, a random sequence of rises and collapses with no lasting improvement. When you look closely, progress becomes difficult to define. Technology advances, but anxiety grows with it. Comfort increases, yet dissatisfaction follows. Knowledge expands, while confusion and division persist. For every problem solved, new ones emerge that feel just as heavy. What improves in one domain often degrades in another, creating the illusion of movement while equilibrium remains unchanged. What makes this emotionally unsettling is how deeply the belief in progress is tied to hope. You tolerate struggle because you assume it leads somewhere. You accept sacrifice because you believe it contributes to a better future. If progress is a myth, then endurance loses its justification. Pain stops being an investment and becomes just pain. The idea of progress also protects identity. It allows you to see yourself as part of something meaningful, moving forward with humanity as a whole. Without it, effort feels local and temporary. Your achievements shrink to personal events rather than steps in a larger story. You continue believing in progress not because the evidence is clear, but because, without that belief, time feels heavier. The future stops glowing. Survival becomes repetition, and meaning has to be carried moment by moment without the promise that history itself is on your side. Knowledge may end in circularity. Knowledge may end in circularity, with every attempt at certainty looping back on itself instead of reaching solid ground. This idea is unsettling because knowledge feels like something you build upward, brick by brick, toward truth. You assume that if you keep asking questions and demanding reasons, you will eventually reach a foundation that does not need defending. But when you push far enough, justification begins to repeat itself. Beliefs are supported by other beliefs, which are supported by assumptions that quietly rely on the original belief to make sense. You trust your senses because they usually work, but you only know they work because you trust the experiences they provide. You trust reason because it produces reliable conclusions, but you judge those conclusions using the same reasoning you are trying to justify. Even logic depends on principles that cannot be proven without using logic itself. At some point, explanation turns inward. What makes this emotionally disturbing is the realization that certainty may be impossible in principle. Doubt does not disappear with more information, it simply moves deeper. The more rigorously you examine what you know, the clearer it becomes that knowledge rests on commitments you never fully chose and cannot fully defend. This does not stop you from knowing things in practice. You still navigate the world successfully. You still predict, plan, and learn. But beneath that effectiveness lies fragility. Your confidence in truth is supported by a structure that ultimately supports itself. You continue seeking knowledge not because it leads to absolute certainty, but because questioning cannot be turned off. Understanding advances, even if its foundations never settle. Every answer circles back to trust. Trust in perception, trust in reason, trust that the loop is stable enough to stand on, even if it never truly closes. You may be replaceable without loss. You may be replaceable without loss, removed from the world without leaving any gap that truly matters. This idea is unsettling because you experience yourself as irreplaceable. Your thoughts feel singular. Your relationships feel personal. Your presence feels like something the world would notice if it disappeared. But when you step back, the systems around you rarely depend on individuals. Roles are filled. Conversations continue. Work resumes. Absence is absorbed faster than expected. What makes this idea emotionally disturbing is not that people wouldn't feel your loss for a time, but that life would reorganize without needing you specifically. Someone else could say similar words, hold similar positions, provide similar value. Even your most unique traits might not be as rare as they feel from the inside. The world does not pause for missing pieces. It routes around them. This challenges the quiet belief that your existence is necessary. You may be meaningful to certain people, but not essential. The structures you participate in are designed for continuity, not preservation of individuals. History remembers few, and even those memories fade, flatten, and simplify until the person becomes an idea rather than a presence. The discomfort comes from realizing that meaning may not be guaranteed by uniqueness. Being conscious does not ensure being needed. Being alive does not ensure being irreplaceable. You continue living as if you matter uniquely because that belief sustains motivation and care, even though the world itself may not register your absence as a meaningful loss once it adjusts and moves forward. Existence might be a burden. Existence might be a burden, not because life is always painful, but because being conscious means carrying weight that never fully lifts. This idea unsettles because existence is usually framed as a gift, something inherently valuable simply because it is. Yet awareness comes with obligations that cannot be refused. You must think, choose, feel, remember, and anticipate. Even in moments of calm, there is maintenance, needs return, worries resurface, time keeps moving, and you are required to move with it. Consciousness does not allow neutrality. To exist is to be exposed to desire, loss, boredom, fear, and responsibility. You are constantly negotiating between what you want, what you fear, and what reality allows. Rest is temporary. Relief is conditional. The mind keeps generating concerns even when nothing is wrong. What makes this emotionally disturbing is the absence of consent. You did not choose to be here, yet you are tasked with managing the consequences of being alive. You inherit a body that will age and fail, relationships that can be lost, and a future that demands decisions whether you feel ready or not. Even happiness comes with pressure, the fear of losing it, the awareness of its fragility. Existence also carries awareness of its own ending. You move through life knowing that effort does not guarantee permanence. Everything you build requires upkeep, and everything you love is vulnerable to time, meaning if it exists, must be continually created and defended against entropy. You continue living not necessarily because existence feels light, but because laying it down is unthinkable, and because once awareness exists, it clings to itself, even when the weight of being feels heavier than the alternative you cannot experience. Non-existence may be preferable, but unreachable. Non-existence may be preferable, but unreachable. A state imagined as relief, yet forever inaccessible from within life. This idea disturbs because it reframes existence not as a gift, but as a condition you did not consent to and cannot fully exit while experiencing it. Non-existence appears from the outside as the absence of struggle, desire, fear, and exhaustion. No effort is required, no pain arises, no meaning needs to be maintained. From a purely conceptual view, it seems lighter than being alive. Yet, the moment you try to grasp non-existence, it collapses. You can think about it, but you cannot experience it. Every comparison you make is made from the standpoint of being conscious. Relief from suffering is always imagined as something felt, but non-existence contains no feeling at all. The preference for it is formed inside a mind that cannot accompany itself there. What makes this emotionally unsettling is the trap it creates. If life is heavy, non-existence seems appealing. If life is good, the comparison fades. But in neither case can you truly evaluate the alternative. You are locked into experience while judging the absence of experience, weighing something you can feel against something you can never touch. This idea also destabilizes motivation. If non-existence is preferable, then striving feels unnecessary. But because non-existence cannot be lived, only thought about, life continues regardless of your judgment. Desire persists. Fear persists. Awareness persists. You remain alive not because existence has won the argument, but because the argument itself can only occur while you exist, forcing you to carry preferences that point toward a state you can never inhabit. Culture may be built on death fear. Culture may be built on death fear, shaped not primarily by creativity or wisdom, but by a shared terror of disappearing. This idea is unsettling because culture feels elevated. Art, religion, tradition, morality, and ambition seem like expressions of meaning and progress. But beneath those layers may sit a quieter motive, the need to distract ourselves from the fact that we will die. From this perspective, much of what humans create is not about living well, but about denying or softening the reality of non-existence. Humans are uniquely aware of their own mortality. You know that your body will fail, that your consciousness will end, and that no amount of intelligence can fully escape that outcome. That awareness produces anxiety too large to face constantly. Culture steps in as a buffer. Stories promise continuity, religions offer permanence, achievements suggest legacy. Social roles provide identity that feels larger than a single life. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how deeply this fear may shape behavior. You pursue success not just for satisfaction, but to feel significant. You defend beliefs not only because they feel true, but because they protect you from emptiness. Even love can become a shield, a way to feel anchored against impermanence. If culture is built on death fear, then many values are not neutral or noble, but compensatory. They exist to keep existential dread at a manageable distance. This does not make them false, but it makes them fragile. When belief systems crack, fear rushes back in. You continue participating in culture because opting out does not remove mortality. It only removes the stories that make it bearable. Desire may be a trap. Desire may be a trap, not a guide toward fulfillment, but a mechanism that keeps you moving without ever letting you arrive. This idea is unsettling because desire feels like direction. You trust it to tell you what matters, what to pursue, what will finally make life feel complete. But desire rarely points to satisfaction. It points to motion. Once one desire is fulfilled, another quietly takes its place, often stronger, often more urgent. Relief is brief. Want returns. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how natural this cycle feels. Desire promises resolution just ahead, convincing you that one more achievement, one more connection, one more change will be enough. But the structure of desire is not built for completion. It is built for continuation. The mind adapts quickly to gains, resetting expectations and renewing lack. From a survival perspective, this makes sense. A satisfied organism stops striving, an unsatisfied one keeps moving, acquiring, competing, reproducing. Desire keeps the system active. Fulfillment would slow it down. The trap reveals itself when you notice that peace is always postponed. You imagine rest after success, contentment after understanding, happiness after improvement. But the finish line recedes as you approach it, replaced by new standards and new absences. You continue trusting desire because ignoring it feels like stagnation or death, even as it quietly ensures that longing outpaces satisfaction, keeping you chasing states that never fully resolve into lasting peace. Truth may undermine happiness. Truth may undermine happiness, not because happiness is false, but because clarity can strip away the illusions that make it possible. This idea unsettles because truth is usually treated as a moral good, something that liberates and strengthens. You are encouraged to seek it, to face reality, to see things as they really are. Yet many of the beliefs that sustain happiness are fragile. They depend on optimism, hope, and selective attention. Truth has no obligation to preserve them. When comforting assumptions are examined too closely, they begin to fail. The belief that effort is always rewarded, that suffering has purpose, that things will work out in the end, these ideas help people endure, but they are not guaranteed. Seeing the world without these buffers can make it feel colder, less forgiving, and more indifferent. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how it places you in a dilemma. To know more is often to lose something. Awareness brings complexity, doubt, and ambiguity. You begin to notice randomness where you once saw fairness, limits where you once saw possibility, and silence where you once felt guidance. Happiness that relied on simplicity becomes harder to sustain. Truth also removes distance from uncomfortable facts. Mortality becomes unavoidable. Injustice appears structural rather than exceptional. Control feels narrower than it once did. The more clearly you see, the less room there is for comforting stories that soften the edges of existence. You continue seeking truth anyway, even as it threatens the ease of belief, because once a certain clarity is reached, returning to ignorance feels like a different kind of loss, trading comfort for a sense of honesty that refuses to fully coexist with happiness. Time will erase all significance. Time will erase all significance, no matter how meaningful something feels while it exists. This idea unsettles because significance feels durable from the inside. Moments feel important. Achievements feel earned. Love feels lasting. You act as if what happens now will continue to matter simply because it matters to you. But time does not preserve importance. It only allows things to persist briefly before they fade. Everything that feels heavy now is already moving toward irrelevance. On a human scale, time thins meaning gradually. Memories blur, names are forgotten, stories lose detail and then disappear entirely. What once defined a life becomes a footnote, then nothing at all. Even the most influential lives shrink under enough distance, reduced to abstractions or symbols detached from lived experience. On a larger scale, the erosion becomes absolute. Civilizations vanish, languages die, entire cultures leave no trace. Given enough time, even planets erase themselves. The universe does not store meaning. It does not remember. It does not preserve what mattered. Significance exists only while someone is there to feel it. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how it reframes effort. You struggle, build, love, and sacrifice as if these actions accumulate into something permanent. Time quietly ensures they do not. Every value you hold is temporary, dependent on a narrow window of awareness that will eventually close. Yet you continue acting as if things matter. You assign importance. You care deeply, not because time will honor it, but because meaning does not wait for permanence. It flares briefly, fully aware of its disappearance, existing only in the fragile span where someone is there to feel that it matters at all. Why exist? May have no answer. Why exist? May have no answer. Not because the question is too difficult, but because nothing was ever meant to respond to it. This idea is unsettling because the question feels natural. You expect existence to justify itself the way actions do. When something happens, you look for a reason. When something matters, you assume it has a purpose. But existence may not follow those rules. There may be no intention behind it, no goal it is moving toward, no explanation waiting to be uncovered if you search hard enough. Purpose is something minds impose, not something reality provides. Reasons exist inside systems of meaning, and meaning requires a point of view. Before minds, there were no reasons. There were only events. Existence may simply be one of those events, unplanned, uninterested, and complete without explanation. What makes this emotionally disturbing is the silence that follows the question. You can ask why you act, why you care, why you suffer, but when you ask why anything exists at all, the universe does not respond. It does not reject the question. It ignores it. There is no hidden message, no final revelation, no deeper layer that resolves the unease. This leaves you in a strange position. You continue searching for meaning while knowing the ultimate question may be empty. You build purposes locally, temporarily, knowing they rest on nothing deeper than choice and circumstance. You exist not because there is an answer, but because existence happened. And that may be the only truth the question ever points to. Consciousness may be a temporary cosmic error. Consciousness may be a temporary cosmic error, a brief malfunction in an otherwise indifferent universe. This idea is unsettling because awareness feels profound, central, and meaningful. You experience thoughts, emotions, and self-reflection as something special, perhaps even purposeful, but the universe shows no clear need for consciousness. Most of reality functions perfectly without awareness, without suffering, without questioning itself. Stars burn, galaxies collide, matter organizes and dissolves without ever knowing it exists. Consciousness may have emerged accidentally, a side effect of increasing complexity rather than a goal. A nervous system that became capable of modeling the world may have crossed a threshold, producing subjective experience without any cosmic intention behind it. The universe did not ask for observers. They simply appeared. What makes this emotionally disturbing is what it implies about meaning. If consciousness is an error, then suffering is not tragic in any grand sense. It is just a byproduct of awareness existing where it never needed to. Pain, anxiety, and fear arise not because something is wrong with the universe, but because something unusual happened inside it. This also reframes your sense of importance. You may feel like a witness to reality, but reality may not care whether it is witnessed at all. Consciousness could vanish, and the universe would continue unchanged, smoother, quieter, and free of experience. You continue treating awareness as significant because it is everything to you, even though, on a cosmic scale, it may be nothing more than a brief and unnecessary deviation that will eventually correct itself. The universe might be hostile to human values. The universe might be hostile to human values, not actively cruel, but structured in ways that quietly oppose what matters most to you. This idea unsettles because your deepest values feel fundamental. You care about fairness, meaning, love, survival, and continuity. You assume, often without realizing it, that reality should at least be compatible with these concerns. Yet the universe operates by principles that do not recognize them. It favors efficiency, entropy, and scale, not justice or compassion. What appears hostile is not intention, but mismatch. Human values require stability, safety, and time. The universe offers instability, danger, and eventual decay. Stars explode without regard for life. Radiation, extinction events, and cosmic accidents erase progress without warning. Even at a smaller scale, biology rewards competition and survival over kindness. Suffering is not an error in the system. It is a byproduct of how the system works. What makes this emotionally disturbing is the implication that caring deeply may place you at odds with reality itself. To value life is to fear a universe that casually ends it. To value meaning is to exist in a cosmos that offers none. The more sensitive you are to suffering, the more exposed you become. Human morality may function like a local rebellion, a fragile layer imposed against indifferent forces. You build pockets of value in a reality that does not support them by default. Nothing guarantees these pockets will last. You continue acting as if values matter, not because the universe confirms them, but because abandoning them would mean aligning yourself fully with a reality that feels fundamentally incompatible with what it means to be human. Suffering could outweigh happiness overall. Suffering could outweigh happiness overall, not just in your life, but across all lives that have ever existed. This idea is disturbing because it challenges the quiet assumption that existence balances out, that pain is somehow compensated by joy in the end. You endure hardship believing it is offset elsewhere by pleasure, love, growth, or meaning. But when you step back and consider the scale of suffering, that balance begins to look uncertain. Pain is intense, immediate, and often prolonged. Hunger, fear, illness, loss, and anxiety shape most lives far more consistently than moments of deep happiness. Joy tends to be brief, fragile, and dependent on conditions that can collapse without warning. Suffering, by contrast, requires little to arise and much to prevent. It appears easily and lingers stubbornly. What makes this emotionally unsettling is that suffering also compounds. Trauma echoes forward. Fear reshapes behavior. Loss alters entire lifetimes. Happiness rarely has the same lasting weight. A joyful moment fades quickly, while a painful one can redefine a person. When you multiply this pattern across billions of lives, the scale tilts further. This idea also unsettles moral narratives. If suffering outweighs happiness overall, then existence itself becomes morally ambiguous. Creating life no longer clearly adds value. Progress no longer guarantees improvement. Endurance stops looking heroic and starts looking obligatory. Yet life continues producing desire, hope, and attachment regardless of the balance. You still seek happiness even if it is rarer. You still avoid pain even if it dominates, not because the equation is fair, but because suffering and happiness are felt locally, moment by moment, while the total never reveals itself clearly enough to stop you from living within it. Optimism may be a cognitive bias. Optimism may be a cognitive bias, not a clear-eyed assessment of reality, but a mental distortion designed to keep you moving. This idea is unsettling because optimism feels virtuous. You are taught that hope is strength, that positive thinking reflects wisdom or resilience, but psychology suggests optimism may function less as insight and more as protection. The mind filters information in ways that favor survival, not accuracy. You overestimate your control, underestimate risk, and believe the future will turn out better than evidence alone would justify. From an evolutionary perspective, pessimism can paralyze. A creature that accurately calculates every danger may hesitate until it starves. Optimism pushes action. It encourages risk, reproduction, persistence. You plan, strive, and endure because you believe things will improve even when history suggests otherwise. The belief itself becomes adaptive, regardless of whether it is true. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how invisible the bias is. Optimism does not announce itself as distortion. It feels like clarity. You interpret setbacks as temporary, failures as lessons, suffering as meaningful steps towards something better. But these interpretations may not reflect reality's structure. They may simply be the stories your mind tells to prevent despair. When optimism cracks through trauma, loss, or prolonged disappointment, the world does not suddenly become worse. It becomes sharper, more honest, less forgiving. You realize how much emotional stability depended on believing things would work out. You continue hoping not because you've proven hope rational, but because abandoning it makes existence heavier. Optimism may not reveal truth, but it keeps you functional, and that may be the only reason it exists at all. Pessimism might be closer to truth. Pessimism might be closer to truth, not because it feels good, but because it refuses to soften reality. This idea is unsettling because pessimism is often dismissed as weakness or negativity. You are encouraged to be optimistic, to expect improvement, to believe things will work out. But optimism filters experience through hope, selectively highlighting possibility while downplaying limitation, loss, and failure. Pessimism does the opposite. It pays attention to what persists, not what briefly improves. Suffering is reliable. Decline is common. Entropy never stops. Bodies age, systems break, relationships fracture, and every gain requires effort to maintain. Pessimism takes these patterns seriously instead of treating them as temporary obstacles on an upward path. It does not assume progress. It demands evidence. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how calm pessimism can be. It does not panic. It does not rage. It simply lowers expectations until they align with what is consistently observed. In doing so, it strips away comforting narratives that protect self-esteem and motivation. This does not mean pessimism eliminates hope entirely. It means hope becomes cautious, conditional, and limited. Joy becomes fragile but honest. Happiness becomes rare but less deceptive. You continue leaning toward optimism because pessimism threatens momentum and meaning. But beneath the discomfort, pessimism may feel closer to reality because it asks less of the world than the world has ever reliably given. Human dignity may lack any objective basis. Human dignity may lack any objective basis, existing not as a fact of the universe, but as an agreement humans insist on maintaining. This idea unsettles because dignity feels self-evident. It feels wrong to treat a person as expendable, interchangeable, or merely instrumental. You sense that human life has inherent worth, something that should not depend on usefulness, strength, intelligence, or success. Yet, when you look for this worth in reality itself, it is nowhere to be found. Nature does not recognize dignity. Biology values survival and reproduction, not moral worth. The universe does not mark certain beings as inviolable. It does not protect the weak, preserve fairness, or enforce respect. From a purely objective standpoint, humans are configurations of matter governed by the same laws as everything else. Nothing in those laws assigns special status. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how fragile dignity becomes under this view. If it is not grounded in objective reality, then it survives only through collective belief and enforcement. History shows how easily that belief can erode. Entire groups have been declared less worthy, less human, or disposable simply by shifting narratives and power. Dignity then becomes something you must actively uphold, not something guaranteed. It exists only where people choose to see one another as more than resources or obstacles. This choice can be withdrawn, ignored, or overridden. You continue to treat dignity as real, not because the universe demands it, but because without it, moral life collapses into efficiency and force, and existence becomes something measured only by utility rather than by the irreducible fact of being human. You may be morally lucky, not morally good. You may be morally lucky, not morally good, even though your actions feel chosen and your values feel earned. This idea unsettles because it reframes virtue as accident. You experience yourself as someone who makes moral decisions, resists wrongdoing, and acts with intention. But when you look closely, many of the traits you credit yourself for may come from circumstances you did not choose. Your upbringing, culture, temperament, and opportunities shaped what felt natural or unthinkable long before you ever reflected on ethics. Had you been born elsewhere, raised differently, or placed under harsher pressure, your moral behavior might look very different. The line between acting well and acting badly often depends less on character than on the situations you are exposed to. When temptation is absent, restraint looks like virtue. When power is limited, humility comes easily. When survival is secure, kindness feels affordable. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how it undermines praise and blame. If your goodness depends heavily on luck, then moral pride becomes unstable. You may not be better than those who acted cruelly. You may simply have been spared the conditions that would have revealed the same capacity in you. This idea also destabilizes judgment. Condemnation starts to feel fragile when you recognize how little separates you from the actions you criticize. You begin to see morality not as a fixed trait, but as a narrow path maintained by circumstance. You continue to act ethically not because you can be certain of your goodness, but because acting otherwise would expose how thin the line really is between who you are and who you could have been under different conditions. Circumstance may shape character more than choice. Circumstance may shape character more than choice, quietly deciding who you become long before you feel responsible for it. This idea is unsettling because it undermines the story you tell yourself about agency. You believe your character reflects decisions you made, values you chose, and principles you stood by. But when you look closely, much of who you are traces back to conditions you never controlled. The family you were born into, the culture that shaped your norms, the opportunities you encountered, and the traumas you endured all sculpted your responses before you ever had the chance to reflect. Small changes in circumstance can produce radically different people. The same person raised in safety becomes compassionate, raised in threat becomes guarded. Exposed to stability, you learn patience. Exposed to chaos, you learn survival. What feels like moral strength or weakness may simply be the outcome of repeated pressures acting on a nervous system trying to adapt. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how fragile moral judgment becomes. If character is largely circumstantial, then praise and blame lose their certainty. You might admire someone not because they chose well, but because they were lucky. You might condemn someone not because they are worse, but because they were shaped differently. Choice still exists, but it operates within narrow boundaries set by environment, biology, and history. You choose from the options you are given, with the tools you happen to have. You continue to hold yourself and others responsible because society depends on it. But beneath that necessity lies discomforting awareness. If your circumstances had been different, you might have become someone you would barely recognize. Rationality could justify cruelty. Rationality could justify cruelty, not by accident, but by design, when logic is detached from empathy. This idea is unsettling because rationality is usually treated as a moral safeguard. You are taught that thinking clearly leads to better, kinder outcomes, that reason restrains impulse and corrects excess. But rationality itself has no values. It only optimizes for goals. If the goal is efficiency, stability, survival, or progress, cruelty can become a perfectly logical step. History shows this repeatedly. When people are reduced to numbers, variables, or obstacles, suffering becomes an acceptable cost. A rational system can conclude that harming a few benefits the many, that sacrifice is necessary, that pain is justified if it serves a larger outcome. The logic can be flawless while the result is brutal. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how clean cruelty can look when reason supports it. There is no rage, no sadism, no hatred required, just calm calculation, justified harm delivered without emotion, defended with charts, principles, or long-term projections. Rational cruelty often feels more terrifying than irrational violence because it believes it is right. This idea also turns inward. You may believe your own moral positions are grounded in reason, but reason can be bent toward almost any conclusion if the premises are chosen carefully. Once empathy is treated as optional rather than foundational, rationality stops protecting others and starts evaluating them. You continue trusting rationality because abandoning it feels dangerous, even as you realize that without compassion anchoring it, reason alone can calmly argue its way toward outcomes that feel deeply, irreversibly wrong. Evil might require no intention. Evil might require no intention, no malice, and no desire to cause harm, only systems and actions allowed to run without care. This idea unsettles because you want evil to be personal. You want it to come from hatred, cruelty, or conscious choice. If harm requires intent, then it can be identified, condemned, and stopped. But much of the worst suffering in the world does not come from villains. It comes from indifference, routine, and people following rules they did not create. Systems can produce devastating outcomes without anyone feeling responsible. Bureaucracies function efficiently while obscuring accountability. Technologies optimize outcomes while ignoring consequences. Individuals perform small, seemingly harmless actions that accumulate into large-scale harm. No one chooses evil, yet evil happens anyway. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how easily ordinary behavior becomes dangerous. You do not need to hate anyone to participate in harm. You only need to comply, to look away, to prioritize convenience or obedience over attention. Evil becomes something that emerges from neglect rather than intention, from absence rather than presence. This idea removes the comfort of moral distance. If evil does not require intent, then it cannot be neatly separated from normal life. It can arise wherever thought stops, where empathy is deferred, and where responsibility dissolves into procedure. You continue acting within systems that reward efficiency over care, knowing that harm may result even when you mean well, and that the most frightening forms of evil may come not from those who wish to destroy, but from those who never stop to notice what they are enabling. Ignorance may be morally safer than knowledge. Ignorance may be morally safer than knowledge, even though knowledge is often praised as a virtue. This idea unsettles because it suggests that knowing more does not necessarily make you better, only more responsible. When you are unaware, harm can occur without your involvement, but once you know, inaction becomes a choice. Knowledge expands the range of things you could have prevented, changed, or responded to, and with that expansion comes moral weight. Awareness exposes you to suffering you cannot fix. You learn about distant injustice, systemic harm, and preventable pain, yet lack the power to meaningfully intervene. The knowledge remains, demanding response without offering resolution. Ignorance shields you from this burden. It allows you to live locally, caring only about what you can touch, without the constant pressure of global responsibility. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how easily knowledge turns into guilt. Once you understand the consequences of your comfort, your consumption, or your indifference, innocence disappears. Every benefit begins to feel borrowed. Every choice becomes morally charged. You can no longer claim you didn't know. Knowledge can also enable harm. Understanding systems, psychology, or power dynamics gives you tools that can be used to manipulate, exploit, or justify cruelty. Ignorance limits what you can intentionally do wrong. In this sense, not knowing can act as a moral boundary. You continue seeking knowledge because truth feels valuable, but you also feel the quiet relief of not knowing everything. Some ignorance keeps moral life livable, not because it is good, but because carrying full awareness without full power can make goodness feel impossible to sustain. Understanding may deepen despair. Understanding may deepen despair, not because knowledge is harmful, but because clarity removes the illusions that once kept you steady. This idea is unsettling because learning is supposed to be empowering. You are taught that insight leads to control, that awareness brings freedom. But deeper understanding often does the opposite. As you see how systems truly function, how fragile meaning is, how limited agency can be, the comfort of simplicity erodes. Problems that once felt solvable reveal layers that never fully close. Understanding exposes constraints. You learn how little control individuals have over large forces, how often suffering emerges without intention, how rarely outcomes match effort. You see patterns repeat despite intelligence and goodwill. What once felt like bad luck begins to look structural. What once felt like hope begins to feel conditional. What makes this emotionally disturbing is that you cannot unsee what you've learned. Awareness does not come with an undo button. Once illusions dissolve, they rarely return in full strength. You may still function, still care, still participate, but something has shifted. Confidence becomes cautious. Belief becomes provisional. For some, understanding creates humility. For others, it creates heaviness. The more you grasp the limits of progress, morality, and reason, the harder it becomes to sustain uncomplicated optimism. You realize that many answers do not resolve tension. They merely explain why the tension persists. You continue seeking understanding because ignorance no longer satisfies you, but each layer of clarity brings you closer to truths that offer explanation without comfort, and awareness begins to feel less like illumination and more like exposure to a cold, unbuffered reality you now have to live inside. Empathy might be biologically limited. Empathy might be biologically limited, not because you don't care enough, but because your mind was never built to feel everything it encounters. This idea is unsettling because empathy feels like a moral achievement. You believe that if you try hard enough, you can understand anyone, feel their pain, and respond appropriately. But empathy is not infinite. It evolved under constraints. Human brains developed to care deeply about a small circle, family, tribe, familiar faces, not vast numbers of distant or abstract others. Your emotional system responds strongly to individual stories, but weakens as scale increases. One person's suffering can move you deeply. Thousands become statistics. Millions become noise. This isn't a personal failure, it's a structural limit. Your nervous system simply cannot generate equal concern for every mind it knows exists. What makes this emotionally disturbing is the gap between moral ideals and biological reality. You may believe all suffering matters equally, yet your emotions refuse to cooperate. You feel guilty for not feeling more, even though your brain cannot sustain that level of emotional engagement without collapsing into numbness or overload. This limitation shapes behavior in quiet ways. It allows distant harm to persist. It makes atrocities easier to ignore when they are far away, slow, or abstract. It also makes selective compassion feel natural, even when it conflicts with your values. You continue believing empathy can expand endlessly because that belief feels morally necessary, but beneath it lies a harder truth. Your capacity to care may be bounded, uneven, and biased by design, forcing you to navigate a world where knowing about suffering does not guarantee the ability to truly feel it. Some suffering may be beyond moral repair. Some suffering may be beyond moral repair, not because no one cares, but because no response can truly reach what was taken. This idea unsettles because morality is often framed as restorative. We believe harm can be compensated, healed, forgiven, or balanced by justice. Apologies are offered, punishments are given, narratives of growth and meaning are constructed. These responses help us believe that no suffering is final, that nothing is irredeemably broken. Yet some experiences leave damage that cannot be undone or integrated. Certain losses do not teach lessons. Certain traumas do not produce strength. They do not resolve into meaning or closure. They simply alter a person permanently, narrowing their world in ways that no later good can fully offset. What makes this emotionally disturbing is the collapse of moral symmetry. If some suffering cannot be repaired, then fairness fails at a fundamental level. No future happiness can retroactively justify what occurred. No explanation makes it acceptable. The harm remains untouched by moral accounting. This idea challenges comforting beliefs about justice and resilience. It suggests that the universe allows damage without obligation to make it right. The burden of repair falls entirely on those least able to carry it, while time moves on without acknowledgement. You continue to speak of healing and redemption, not because they always succeed, but because admitting the existence of irreparable suffering forces you to confront a reality where morality has limits and where some wounds exist without answers, balance, or resolution. Meaning may require illusions to survive. Meaning may require illusions to survive, not because reality is empty, but because reality without filtering can be unbearable. This idea unsettles because it suggests that meaning is not something discovered in the world, but something protected from it. The stories you tell yourself about purpose, fairness, destiny, and significance soften the raw edges of existence. When those stories weaken, meaning does not necessarily deepen. It often thins, losing its emotional grip even as understanding increases. Illusions give structure. They turn randomness into narrative, coincidence into intention, and survival into purpose. Believing your efforts matter in some lasting way allows you to invest energy, care, and sacrifice without being crushed by uncertainty. Without these interpretive layers, actions begin to feel arbitrary, values feel chosen rather than grounded, and motivation starts to erode. What makes this emotionally unsettling is recognizing how fragile meaning becomes under full honesty. When you strip away comforting assumptions about progress, justice, permanence, or cosmic concern, what remains may still be true, but less livable. The mind seems to require a certain amount of selective blindness to function without despair. This does not mean illusions are lies in the ordinary sense. They are often shared frameworks that make life coherent enough to inhabit. They do not need to be literally true to be psychologically effective. Their role is not accuracy, but endurance. You continue to defend certain beliefs not because you are fooled, but because without them, meaning risks collapsing into something you can explain clearly yet struggle to feel. Illusion becomes less an enemy of truth and more a quiet scaffold holding experience together just enough to keep you moving. Self-knowledge could be impossible. Self-knowledge could be impossible, not because you haven't looked hard enough, but because the thing doing the looking can never fully see itself. This idea is unsettling because you assume that, if nothing else, you should at least be able to know who you are. Your thoughts feel close, immediate, familiar. You believe that with enough reflection, honesty, or insight, you can uncover your true motives, values, and nature. But every act of self-examination is filtered through the very mind you are trying to understand. You observe yourself using the same system that generates your thoughts, biases, and blind spots. The moment you ask why you acted a certain way, the answer is shaped by memory, emotion, and self-protection. You explain yourself in ways that feel coherent, but coherence is not accuracy. Much of what drives you operates below awareness. Habits formed before language, emotional patterns laid down before reflection, instincts that rational thought only interprets after the fact. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how convincing self-understanding feels. When you explain yourself, it feels like clarity. When you justify a decision, it feels honest. But those explanations may be narratives constructed to preserve a stable identity rather than reveal the truth. You may never know whether you are kind because you value others or because it keeps you safe. You may never know whether your beliefs are chosen or inherited. Even your attempts to be brutally honest are shaped by limits you cannot step outside. There is no external vantage point from which to compare your self-image with what you actually are. You keep searching inward because not searching feels worse. You build a working version of yourself and live as if it's accurate, knowing that the person you believe you are may be only the most believable story your mind knows how to tell. You may never know who you truly are. You may never know who you truly are, not because you haven't looked hard enough, but because there may be no fixed self to uncover. This idea is unsettling because self-knowledge feels like a reachable goal. You reflect, analyze, remember, and assume that with enough honesty you can arrive at something solid, a core identity that explains your actions and desires. But every attempt to observe yourself is filtered through the very mind you are trying to understand. The observer and the observed are the same, distorting each other endlessly. Your personality shifts with context. You speak differently depending on who is listening. Your values bend under pressure. Your reactions surprise you. Even your deepest convictions can dissolve after a single experience, leaving you wondering how certain you ever were. The version of yourself you recognize today may feel foreign a decade from now, yet each version felt authentic at the time. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how much meaning depends on self-understanding. You make life choices based on who you think you are. Careers, relationships, and identities are built on that assumption. But if the self is fluid, constructed moment by moment, then those decisions rest on something unstable. Memory complicates this further. You interpret your past selectively, highlighting traits that fit your current story while ignoring contradictions. Introspection doesn't reveal a neutral truth, it edits one. Even your reasons for acting can be invented after the fact, convincing you that you understood yourself all along. You continue searching for a true self because uncertainty feels unbearable, even though what you call you may be nothing more than a shifting perspective trying to recognize itself in motion. Memory might betray identity. Memory might betray identity, not by failing outright, but by quietly reshaping who you believe you are. This idea unsettles because memory feels like the backbone of the self. You believe you are the same person over time because you remember being that person. Your values, relationships, and sense of continuity depend on recalling a past that feels stable and personal. But memory does not simply preserve identity, it edits it. Memories are not stored intact. They are reconstructed each time they are recalled, influenced by current emotions, beliefs, and needs. Over time, details shift, emphasis changes, and entire events can be altered or lost. You may forget what once mattered deeply, or remember things that never happened in the way you believe. The self that memory presents to you may be a revision, not an original. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how subtle the betrayal is. You do not feel memory changing. The altered version feels just as authentic as the original. Confidence remains even as accuracy fades. You continue making decisions based on a personal history that may no longer reflect who you were or who you are becoming. If memory is unstable, then identity becomes unstable with it. You may believe you are consistent when you are not, loyal to values you have already abandoned or shaped by experiences that no longer exist as they once did. The self becomes a moving target, narrated by a memory system that prioritizes coherence over truth. You continue trusting memory because without it, identity dissolves entirely, even as the possibility lingers that the story holding you together is quietly rewriting you from the inside. Thought may not reflect reality at all. Thought may not reflect reality at all, even though it feels like your primary way of accessing it. You trust thinking because it feels intimate and precise. Ideas appear clear, conclusions feel earned. When you reason, it seems as though your mind is mapping the world as it truly is. But thought does not arise to mirror reality. It arises to help you survive within it. What you experience as understanding may be a simplified internal model designed for usefulness, not accuracy. Your concepts break the world into categories that reality itself does not recognize. Objects, identities, causes, and meanings are imposed by the mind to make experience manageable. Thought trims complexity, ignores contradictions, and fills gaps automatically. What feels like insight may be a convenient fiction that allows you to act without being overwhelmed by detail. What makes this emotionally unsettling is the isolation it implies. If thought does not reflect reality, then you are always one step removed from what actually is. You never encounter the world directly, only interpretations shaped by biology, language, and habit. Even when you correct errors, you do so using the same flawed tool. This idea also destabilizes certainty. If thought is unreliable at its foundation, then confidence becomes suspicious. Strong beliefs may say more about psychological need than truth. Disagreement stops being a clash of views and starts looking like different survival strategies colliding. You continue thinking because there is no alternative. Doubting thought requires thought. So you move through reality guided by internal models that feel coherent and convincing, while quietly suspecting that whatever the world is beyond them may be far stranger than anything your mind can represent. Language might trap, rather than liberate thought. Language might trap rather than liberate thought, shaping what you can think instead of simply expressing it. This idea is unsettling because language feels like freedom. Words allow you to reflect, explain, remember, and connect. They feel like tools you control, but the moment you try to think without words, you notice the walls. Concepts blur. Nuance slips away. Most of your thinking arrives already packaged in familiar phrases, categories, and labels you did not invent. Language divides the world into boxes long before you examine it. It tells you where one thing ends and another begins. It gives you names that feel natural, even when the boundaries they draw are arbitrary. Once something is named, it becomes easier to think about, but harder to think beyond. You stop noticing what does not fit the words you have. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how invisible the trap is. Language feels neutral, but it carries assumptions from the cultures and histories that shaped it. Some ideas become easy to express, others awkward or unsayable. You may feel confusion or discomfort, not because your thoughts are unclear, but because your language has no room for them. Even questioning language must be done in language. Every attempt to escape its influence uses the very system that imposes the limits. You can stretch words, redefine them, or invent new ones, but you never step outside the structure entirely. You continue thinking in language because there is no alternative. It gives shape to your inner life while quietly constraining it, and you may never know which of your thoughts are truly yours, and which are simply the paths language makes easiest to walk. Consciousness may amplify suffering. Consciousness may amplify suffering, turning pain into something deeper, longer, and harder to escape. This idea is unsettling because awareness is often treated as a gift. You value self-reflection, imagination, and understanding as signs of advancement. But consciousness does not merely experience pain, it replays it, anticipates it, and gives it meaning. A physical sensation becomes suffering when the mind attaches fear, memory, and narrative to it. An unconscious organism feels pain and reacts. A conscious one remembers past pain, imagines future pain, and worries about what the pain says about itself. Anxiety extends suffering into the future. Regret drags it into the past. Rumination keeps it alive long after the original cause has faded. Awareness multiplies impact. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how inescapable it feels. You cannot simply turn off reflection without losing what makes you human. The same mind that allows love, creativity, and insight also creates dread, shame, and existential fear. The depth of joy may be inseparable from the depth of suffering. Consciousness also makes pain personal. It is not just something happening, it is something happening to you. Identity wraps around experience, making loss feel permanent and threat feel intimate. Meaning intensifies everything, including harm. You continue valuing consciousness because it defines your existence, even as it ensures that suffering is not limited to moments of damage, but spreads across memory, imagination, and self-awareness, echoing far beyond the original wound. Intelligence could be a liability. Intelligence could be a liability, not because thinking is wrong, but because understanding exposes you to burdens that ignorance never carries. This idea unsettles because intelligence is usually treated as an advantage, a trait that increases control, freedom, and success. Yet greater cognitive ability often brings heightened awareness of risk, limitation, and uncertainty. You see more consequences, more failure points, more ways things can go wrong. Where others act easily, you hesitate. With intelligence comes pattern recognition, and with it, the ability to anticipate loss before it arrives. You recognize trends that lead to collapse. You notice inconsistencies in comforting beliefs. You become aware of how fragile systems are, how temporary stability can be, how narrow the margins really are. This awareness does not necessarily grant power to change outcomes. Often, it only grants clarity. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how intelligence can undermine motivation. When you see how little control individuals truly have, effort can feel symbolic rather than effective. When you understand randomness and structural limits, Optimism becomes harder to sustain. The stories that once energized you may no longer convince you. Intelligence can also isolate. Complex thoughts are difficult to share without distortion. Others may avoid uncomfortable insights or dismiss them as negativity. You learn to self-censor, not because you are wrong, but because clarity can disrupt social harmony. You continue thinking deeply because you cannot unsee what you have seen, even as awareness increases vulnerability, turning intelligence into something that sharpens pain, doubt, and responsibility rather than providing the relief it promises. Reason may erode all comforting beliefs. Reason may erode all comforting beliefs, not by attacking them directly, but by slowly dissolving the foundations that made them feel secure. At first, reason feels like protection. It promises clarity, consistency, and freedom from deception. You apply it to beliefs, hoping to strengthen them, to make what you rely on more stable. But reason does not preserve what feels good. It preserves what survives scrutiny. As it works, familiar certainties begin to thin. Explanations replace mysteries. Mechanisms replace meaning. What once felt given starts to look contingent. Comforting beliefs often depend on assumptions left unexamined. They rely on purpose, fairness, permanence, or special significance. Reason asks why these should be true and refuses answers that appeal only to comfort. With each question, emotional shelter weakens. Beliefs that once grounded you start to feel provisional, upheld by habit rather than necessity. What makes this emotionally unsettling is the asymmetry. Reason can dismantle comfort far more effectively than it can replace it. It exposes flaws without offering substitutes that feel equally sustaining. You may arrive at explanations that are cleaner, more consistent, and less livable. Understanding increases while reassurance disappears. This creates a quiet tension. To stop reasoning feels dishonest. To continue feels costly. You notice that some beliefs remain comforting precisely because they have not been fully examined. Yet once reason has touched them, you cannot return to innocence. You continue using reason because abandoning it would feel like self-deception. But with every belief it refines or removes, comfort becomes something you must consciously rebuild, knowing it rests on foundations reason itself may eventually wear away. Happiness could be incompatible with truth. Happiness could be incompatible with truth, not because truth is cruel by nature, but because it strips away the illusions that make happiness possible. This idea is unsettling because happiness feels like something understanding should improve. You assume that seeing the world clearly will make life richer, more meaningful, more secure, but clarity often removes comfort. As understanding deepens, simple narratives collapse. Certainty erodes. The future looks less guided, less fair, less forgiving than you once believed. Many sources of happiness rely on distortion. You overestimate how much control you have. You believe your life has a coherent arc. You assume your efforts will be rewarded in proportion to their worth. You trust that things tend to work out. These beliefs are not logically guaranteed, yet they provide emotional stability. When they weaken, happiness often weakens with them. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how insight can feel like loss. Learning can feel like subtraction rather than gain. The more you understand probability, impermanence, and randomness, the harder it becomes to sustain uncomplicated joy. You begin to see how fragile everything is, how easily meaning can dissolve, how little the universe owes you. This does not mean ignorance guarantees happiness, but it suggests that some level of illusion may be necessary. You may need softened edges, selective attention, and hopeful narratives to remain emotionally functional. You continue seeking truth anyway, even as it complicates your capacity for contentment. You learn not because it makes you happier, but because once you see something clearly, you cannot unsee it. and happiness, if it survives at all, must now exist without the protections it once relied on. Human progress may be temporary. Human progress may be temporary, a brief upward movement rather than a permanent direction. This idea is unsettling because progress feels like a promise. You are taught that knowledge accumulates, morality improves, and societies move forward over time. Each generation assumes it stands on firmer ground than the last. But history does not move in a straight line. It rises, collapses, resets, and forgets. Civilizations advance, decay, and vanish, often taking their values with them. Technological progress can accelerate while moral progress stalls or reverses. Tools improve, but wisdom does not necessarily keep pace. Increased power magnifies both care and cruelty. What looks like advancement may simply be complexity growing faster than restraint. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how fragile progress becomes under pressure. War, scarcity, fear, or instability can strip away norms in moments. Principles once treated as unbreakable quickly become negotiable. Systems that took centuries to build can unravel in years, sometimes in days. This idea also challenges generational confidence. The values you assume are permanent may survive only as long as conditions allow them to. Comfort makes compassion easier. Stability allows patience. When those disappear, progress may not hold. You continue believing in forward movement because the alternative feels like despair. But beneath that belief lies the quieter realization that progress may not be a destination, only a temporary state sustained by circumstances that cannot be guaranteed to last. Civilization might be a fragile accident. Civilization might be a fragile accident, not the inevitable result of progress, but a temporary alignment of conditions that could easily dissolve. This idea unsettles because modern life feels stable, engineered, and permanent. Cities stand tall, systems run daily, knowledge accumulates, and technology advances with confidence. It feels as though humanity has climbed out of chaos and secured its place. Yet this stability depends on delicate chains of cooperation, resources, and trust that are far thinner than they appear. History shows how quickly complexity can collapse. Wars, plagues, environmental shifts, and economic failures have erased centuries of development in remarkably short time spans. Civilization does not fail all at once. It fractures quietly, system by system, until what once felt unbreakable becomes impossible to maintain. Order gives way not to dramatic endings, but to gradual erosion. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how little separates modern life from its absence. Food distribution, electricity, healthcare, and communication all rely on constant coordination. Most people cannot sustain themselves without these networks. Remove a few links and comfort becomes scarcity, predictability becomes improvisation. Civilization also depends on shared belief. Laws, money, and institutions function because people agree they do. When trust erodes, these structures lose their force. No physical law keeps them intact. You continue participating as if civilization is a given, even as the possibility lingers that it exists only because circumstances allow it to, and that beneath the appearance of permanence lies something temporary, vulnerable, and far closer to collapse than daily life suggests. Chaos may be the default state of reality. Chaos may be the default state of reality, with order appearing only briefly, locally, and by accident. This idea is unsettling because order feels fundamental. You wake up expecting the world to behave consistently. Causes lead to effects. Patterns repeat. Structure seems baked into existence. But when you look deeper, order begins to look fragile rather than essential. It requires constant maintenance, narrow conditions, and precise balances. The moment those conditions loosen, disorder rushes in effortlessly. Chaos does not need explanation. It arises naturally when systems are left alone. Entropy increases, structures decay, patterns dissolve. Order, by contrast, looks like an exception, temporary islands of stability surrounded by a vast tendency toward breakdown. Even the laws that govern order appear statistical, not guaranteed, holding only because chaos averages out at scale. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how it reframes safety and meaning. If chaos is default, then stability is borrowed time. Relationships, institutions, identities, and even physical forms exist on the edge of collapse, held together by forces that could fail without warning. The calm you experience is not proof of security, only evidence that disruption has not arrived yet. This idea also weakens narratives of control. Planning, prediction, and mastery feel less powerful when you realize how much depends on fragile alignment. Effort does not guarantee outcome. Intelligence does not ensure stability. Order can vanish faster than it was built. You continue to act as if order will persist because you must. Living requires assuming continuity. But beneath that assumption is the quiet awareness that chaos does not need permission to return, and that everything you rely on exists not because disorder was defeated, but because it is briefly held at bay. Order could be a brief illusion. Order could be a brief illusion, a temporary pattern your mind mistakes for stability in a fundamentally chaotic reality. This idea is unsettling because order feels dependable. You expect cause to follow effect, systems to behave predictably, and structures to endure. Society, identity, routines, and even the laws of nature feel like they rest on something solid. But what you call order may simply be a momentary alignment of forces destined to unravel the way all patterns eventually do. In nature, order emerges briefly and then dissolves. Stars burn out, species vanish, civilizations rise and collapse. Even your own body is a fragile arrangement of processes constantly resisting decay. The appearance of stability is maintained through continuous effort, not permanence. Without constant input, everything drifts toward disorder. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how much meaning you attach to order. You plan your life around expectations of continuity. You invest in systems assuming they will last. You trust structures because they have held so far. But past persistence is not a guarantee of future stability. The universe does not promise upkeep. Order may exist only locally and temporarily, like a ripple in a larger, indifferent flow. The sense that things make sense may be something your mind imposes to stay oriented, not something reality maintains on its own. You continue to rely on order because you must. Living requires assumption of structure, but beneath that necessity lies a quiet awareness. What feels permanent may be balanced on conditions so specific that their collapse is not an exception, but an eventual certainty waiting its turn. You may never know if your life mattered. You may never know if your life mattered, not because it didn't, but because meaning leaves no final receipt. This idea is unsettling because you live as if significance will eventually reveal itself. You imagine that impact accumulates, that effort compounds, that somewhere there is a clear line connecting what you did to what changed. But most effects dissolve quietly. Actions ripple outward, collide with countless other causes, and fade into outcomes no single person can trace back to you. You may influence someone who influences someone else and never see the result. You may prevent harm without ever knowing what would have happened otherwise. You may fail in visible ways while succeeding invisibly, meaning does not announce itself. It does not guarantee witnesses. It rarely arrives with confirmation. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how deeply motivation depends on recognition, even subtle recognition. You want to know that your struggles counted, that your sacrifices weren't wasted, that your presence made a difference beyond your own experience. But the world does not offer reliable feedback at that scale. History forgets. Memory distorts. Outcomes outlive intentions. Even those remembered are remembered inaccurately. Lives are simplified into symbols, stripped of nuance, reduced to lessons or footnotes. Being remembered does not mean being understood. Being impactful does not mean being acknowledged. This uncertainty reaches inward. If you never know whether your life mattered, then meaning becomes something you cannot verify, only commit to. You act without guarantees. You care without proof. You invest yourself in outcomes that may never reflect back to you. You continue living as if your life matters because stopping would hollow experience itself. Even though the universe offers no final answer, no verdict, no moment where meaning steps forward and confirms that your existence truly counted. Legacy might be meaningless. Legacy might be meaningless, not because nothing you do matters now, but because time has no obligation to remember you. This idea unsettles because legacy is often treated as a way to outlast death. You are told that what you leave behind, your work, your influence, your name, can give your life lasting significance. The thought that something of you will persist offers comfort against impermanence. Yet when you widen the frame, that comfort begins to thin. Most lives are forgotten quickly. Names fade within generations. Achievements are absorbed, replaced, or erased. Even those remembered are often reduced to fragments, simplified narratives stripped of the person who actually lived. Memory does not preserve meaning. It distorts it, compresses it, or discards it entirely. Time is not a curator. It is an eroder. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how indifferent the process is. The effort you pour into being remembered does not increase the universe's capacity to care. History does not reward sincerity or sacrifice. It preserves what happens to align with power, accident, or usefulness. The vast majority of human experience vanishes without leaving a trace, not because it lacked value, but because nothing was required to keep it. Even lasting legacies decay. Civilizations collapse. Records are lost. Stars will eventually burn out. In a long enough timeline, remembrance itself becomes impossible. There is no final audience waiting to receive the sum of what you were. You continue to act, create, and care anyway, even as the idea lingers that meaning may not come from being remembered at all, and that legacy might be a story you tell yourself to soften the reality of disappearing completely. The future may invalidate all present values. The future may invalidate all present values, rendering what feels important now irrelevant, outdated, or incomprehensible later. This idea is unsettling because values feel timeless from the inside. You treat your moral convictions, ambitions, and ideals as if they point to something enduring. You sacrifice for them, defend them, and judge yourself through them. But history shows how easily values expire. What once felt obvious becomes embarrassing. What once felt noble becomes cruel. What once felt necessary becomes meaningless. Values are shaped by conditions. They emerge from environments, technologies, power structures, and shared fears. As those conditions change, the values anchored to them lose their grip. Practices once considered moral become atrocities. Beliefs once seen as progressive become naive. The future does not argue with the past, it simply replaces it. What makes this emotionally disturbing is the instability it introduces into commitment. You act today as if your choices matter in a lasting sense, yet they may only make sense within a narrow window of time. The effort you invest, the principles you uphold, the causes you defend may be judged as misguided or irrelevant by those who come after you. This idea also erodes moral confidence. If future perspectives can overturn present values, then certainty begins to feel fragile. You may not be wrong because you are immoral, but because you are early. Or you may be wrong because you are late. There is no neutral position outside time from which to validate your values. You continue living by present standards, not because they are guaranteed to endure, but because you have no access to future ones. You commit knowing your commitments may not survive you, carrying values that feel urgent now, even as time quietly prepares to outgrow them. Existence may lack justification. Existence may lack justification, not because the reason is hidden, but because there was never a reason to begin with. This idea is unsettling because you instinctively search for explanations. When something happens, you ask why. When something persists, you assume it must be supported by a purpose or necessity. Existence feels like it should be answerable in the same way, as if being here requires permission, logic, or intent. But existence may not be the kind of thing that can be justified at all. Justification only makes sense within systems. Actions are justified by goals. Rules are justified by outcomes. Beliefs are justified by evidence. But existence is not an action. It is not pursuing anything. It may simply be the brute fact from which all other questions arise. Asking why it exists may be like asking why there is something rather than nothing, and discovering that nothing was never an alternative that needed rejecting. What makes this emotionally disturbing is the collapse of reassurance. If existence has no justification, then suffering is not part of a larger plan. Joy is not a reward. Meaning is not guaranteed. Things happen because they happen, not because they should. The universe does not owe coherence, fairness, or explanation to the beings inside it. This does not make life meaningless, but it makes meaning fragile. Any sense of purpose must be constructed locally, temporarily, without backing from reality itself. You exist without approval, without explanation, without a final reason standing underneath you. You continue living anyway, not because existence makes sense, but because you are already here. And whatever meaning emerges must do so without the comfort of knowing it was ever justified in the first place. Non-existence might not be worse. Non-existence might not be worse, even though every instinct you have tells you that it must be. This idea is unsettling because existence feels like the baseline against which everything else is measured. To exist is to feel, to want, to fear loss. Non-existence is imagined as a deprivation, an absence of everything that matters. But deprivation only makes sense to someone who is already there to experience it. Where there is no awareness, there is no lack, no suffering, no longing for what could have been. You fear non-existence because you project consciousness into it. You imagine darkness, silence, loneliness. But those are experiences, and non-existence contains none. There is no observer left to miss joy, regret pain, or notice absence. From the inside, there is nothing to be worse off. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how it reframes suffering. Existence includes pain by default. Anxiety, loss, frustration, and fear are woven into awareness. Non-existence does not solve problems, but it does not experience them either. It does not improve things, but it does not harm them. It simply removes the field in which harm occurs. This idea destabilizes the assumption that life must always be preferable. It suggests that the value of existence depends entirely on experience, not on existence itself. Being alive is not automatically better. It is only better if what is felt outweighs what is endured. You continue clinging to existence because your mind is built to preserve itself, not to evaluate neutrality. But beneath that instinct lies a quiet possibility that the absence you fear may not be a loss at all, but simply the end of needing anything to be different. Death may not resolve anything. Death may not resolve anything, not because something follows it, but because resolution itself requires someone to receive it. This idea unsettles because death is often imagined as an answer, an end to pain, confusion, responsibility, or longing. Even when feared, it is framed as a closing chapter, a final punctuation mark that brings coherence to a life. Yet if death is the end of consciousness, there is no subject left to experience closure. Unfinished questions remain unfinished, not in some lingering way, but in a way that simply stops. Regret is not healed. Injustice is not balanced. Meaning is not confirmed or denied. Everything that demanded resolution loses its audience. The need for answers vanishes along with the one who needed them. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how it reframes struggle. Effort does not culminate in understanding. Suffering does not dissolve into clarity. If death erases awareness, then nothing about life is retroactively justified. The narrative you build never receives its conclusion. It simply cuts off mid-thought. This idea strips death of consolation. It is not peace because peace is felt. It is not rest because rest implies relief. It is not escape because escape requires arrival somewhere else. Death becomes absence without compensation. You continue living with unresolved questions, not because they will be answered later, but because this may be the only place they can exist at all, knowing that when awareness ends, the need for resolution disappears with it, leaving nothing behind to mark its absence. Consciousness could fade without notice. Consciousness could fade without notice, not with a clear ending, but with a quiet thinning that goes unrecognized from the inside. This idea is unsettling because awareness feels like an on-off state. You imagine consciousness as something you either have or lose, awake or gone. But there is no clear boundary you can observe. Attention drifts, clarity dulls, presence weakens. At no point is there a signal that says something essential has disappeared. Experience simply becomes narrower. You already see this in small ways. Moments pass that you do not remember. Conversations blur. Days compress into impressions rather than details. You are conscious, yet less vividly so. If awareness can dim gradually, then there may be no moment when you realize it is fading. You might not notice the loss of depth, only the absence of noticing itself. What makes this emotionally disturbing is the loss of control it implies. You assume you would know if something fundamental were slipping away. But consciousness cannot monitor its own disappearance. Any awareness of loss requires awareness to still be there. Once it thins beyond a certain point, there is no one left to register the change. This idea also reframes fear of death. The end may not arrive as a sharp break, but as a soft erasure of detail, significance, and self. Identity may dissolve not in a moment, but in degrees. You continue living as if awareness is stable because it feels that way now, but that stability may be an illusion sustained only while enough consciousness remains to believe in it, fading silently long before anyone could say it was gone. You might never be fully awake. You might never be fully awake, even in your most lucid moments, even when you feel most present. This idea is unsettling because wakefulness feels obvious. You draw a clean line between sleep and awareness, dreaming and reality. When your eyes are open and your thoughts feel coherent, you assume you are conscious in the fullest sense. But awareness may come in layers, and what you call being awake could be only one shallow level of a much deeper process you never access. Much of your life runs automatically. Habits execute without attention. Emotions arise before you understand them. Decisions form before you feel you've chosen. You notice yourself acting after the action has already begun. What feels like control may be observation. What feels like clarity may be narrative added after the fact. What makes this emotionally disturbing is the possibility that you are always partially asleep to your own motives. You may believe you know why you want what you want, why you fear what you fear, why you act as you do. But those explanations might be approximations layered over unconscious machinery. Even moments of insight may only reveal one more surface, not the source. Awakening, in this sense, has no clear endpoint. Each time you think you see clearly, you later realize how much you were missing. Perspective expands, but completion never arrives. There is always another blind spot, another assumption quietly steering perception. You continue striving for awareness because not striving feels dishonest. But the idea lingers. What if full wakefulness is impossible? What if being human means navigating reality through a permanent fog, mistaking temporary clarity for awakening and calling it consciousness because there is nothing else you can compare it to? Reality may be fundamentally unknowable. Reality may be fundamentally unknowable, not because you lack intelligence or effort, but because your mind may be structurally incapable of grasping what truly exists. This idea is unsettling because you trust knowledge as a path forward. You believe that with enough data, reasoning, and refinement, reality will eventually reveal itself. But every attempt to understand the world passes through human perception, human language, and human concepts, tools shaped by survival, not by truth. You do not encounter reality as it is. You encounter a version filtered into forms your mind can tolerate and use. Your senses compress vast complexity into manageable signals. Your brain organizes chaos into patterns, even when none are truly there. Your language divides the world into categories that feel solid but may not correspond to anything fundamental. What you call understanding may simply be internal consistency, not external accuracy. What makes this emotionally disturbing is the ceiling it places on certainty. Even your best theories could be metaphors mistaken for reality itself. You may improve predictions and control outcomes while remaining completely wrong about what the world actually is. The map gets more detailed, but you never touch the territory. This creates a quiet isolation. You are trapped inside representations, unable to step outside your own perspective to compare it against anything absolute. Questions about existence, meaning, and truth may not be unanswered because they are difficult, but because they are unanswerable by minds like yours. You continue seeking understanding because the alternative feels like surrender, even as the possibility remains that reality is not hidden just beyond reach, but permanently beyond comprehension, indifferent to whether it is ever truly known at all. Truth may exceed human capacity. Truth may exceed human capacity, not because it is hidden, but because the mind itself may be too limited to contain it. This idea unsettles because you are taught that understanding is a matter of effort. Learn enough, think deeply enough, and reality will eventually reveal itself. Yet every tool you use to grasp truth, language, logic, perception, mathematics, was shaped for survival, not for completeness. Your mind evolved to navigate a narrow slice of reality, not to comprehend existence in its entirety. There may be aspects of the universe that cannot be translated into human concepts at all. Just as animals cannot understand algebra, there may be structures, dimensions, or truths that lie permanently outside your cognitive range. You would not recognize them as mysteries, because recognizing a mystery already requires the capacity to frame it. What makes this emotionally disturbing is the ceiling it places on inquiry. You may reach a point where questions no longer yield answers, not because you failed, but because your mind cannot go further. Curiosity runs into silence. Insight gives way to incomprehension. The limits are not external barriers, but internal ones. This challenges the comforting belief that meaning is waiting to be uncovered. Some truths may exist without ever being known, not temporarily, but forever. Human understanding becomes provincial, local, incomplete by design. You continue searching anyway, driven by the need to know, even as the possibility lingers that the most fundamental aspects of reality will remain inaccessible, not because they are secret, but because you were never built to see them, leaving truth vast, indifferent, and partially unreachable by any human mind. Philosophy may worsen the human condition. Philosophy may worsen the human condition, not by providing false answers, but by dissolving the illusions that once made life tolerable. This idea unsettles because philosophy is often framed as liberation. You are taught that questioning assumptions leads to clarity, freedom, and wisdom. But sustained philosophical inquiry rarely ends with comfort. It strips away certainties, destabilizes values, and exposes how little ground there is beneath the beliefs that quietly supported daily life. Many philosophical insights do not replace old meanings with stronger ones. They replace them with ambiguity. Moral rules become contingent. Purpose becomes constructed. Identity becomes unstable. What once felt solid turns provisional. The mind becomes better at seeing cracks than at sealing them. What makes this emotionally disturbing is that philosophy offers no guarantee of recovery. Once a belief is dismantled, you cannot always return to it sincerely. You may still act as if it holds, but the innocence is gone. Meaning begins to feel fragile, something you manage rather than inhabit. Awareness increases while certainty thins. Philosophy also widens suffering. It forces you to confront problems that action cannot solve: mortality, absurdity, injustice without remedy. You become aware of limitations that effort cannot overcome. This awareness does not necessarily improve your life. It often deepens unease. You continue thinking because not thinking feels dishonest, yet each layer of understanding may distance you further from the ease of unexamined living. Philosophy sharpens perception while dulling comfort, leaving you more awake to the structure of existence, but less protected from what that structure implies. Reflection might paralyze action. Reflection might paralyze action, turning awareness into a quiet force that stops movement instead of guiding it. This idea is unsettling because reflection feels like progress. You are taught that thinking before acting is wisdom, that examining motives leads to better choices, that understanding yourself makes life clearer. But there is a point where reflection stops being illumination and becomes friction. Every option opens into consequences. Every consequence branches into further doubts, and the simple act of choosing begins to feel irresponsible. As reflection deepens, certainty thins. You see competing values instead of clear priorities. You recognize how limited your information is, how biased your perspective might be, how unintended harm can follow even well-intentioned actions. What once felt like a decision now feels like a gamble you cannot justify. Action starts to feel reckless, while inaction feels safer, cleaner, less guilty. What makes this emotionally disturbing is how invisible the paralysis is. From the outside, it looks like caution or thoughtfulness. From the inside, it feels like being stuck inside a loop of understanding that never resolves. You know too much to act confidently, but not enough to act wisely. Every step forward feels premature. Every pause feels rational. Reflection can erode instinct. It interrupts momentum. It replaces impulse with analysis and analysis with doubt. Eventually, even small actions feel heavy, burdened with significance they may not deserve. You still want to move, to choose, to live. But awareness keeps whispering alternatives, risks, and contradictions. And you begin to wonder whether some forms of understanding are not tools for living at all, but weights that make movement feel unjustifiable, even when standing still costs you just as much.